I am Kendra, 35 years old, and somehow still sitting at the family table where I am treated like a ghost. My mother literally snatched a plate of ribs right out of my hands in front of 30 people, announcing that my sister's husband needed to eat first because he actually worked for a living. My sister just smirked, bragging about her upcoming executive interview at the prestigious Westfield Capital. I did not argue. I simply took a slow sip of my sweet tea. What none of them knew was that I built Westfield Capital from the ground up. I am the CEO. And I was about to make sure my sister learned exactly what it means to beg for a job she does not deserve. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stay perfectly silent while a toxic family underestimated your entire existence. Growing up in our historic Brooklyn brownstone, a property my parents constantly boasted about to their church friends, I learned very early that love was highly conditional. That conditioning was on full display at our annual Labor Day cookout. The afternoon sun was beating down on the backyard. The smell of hickory smoke and barbecue sauce filled the humid air, mixing with the sounds of classic R&B playing from the outdoor speakers. Relatives and neighbors were mingling, holding red plastic cups and laughing in the summer heat. I had just walked up to the folding table, grabbed a paper plate, and carefully placed 2 pieces of ribs on it. I had been setting up chairs, carrying heavy ice coolers, and organizing the buffet all morning, while my younger sister Amanda sat under the patio umbrella checking her makeup and her phone camera. Just as I raised a plastic fork to take my first bite of food for the day, my mother Brenda marched over. She did not ask. She did not say, "Excuse me." She reached out and physically snatched the paper plate right out of my hands. The sudden violent movement nearly spilled dark barbecue sauce down the front of my white summer dress. I stood there, my hands entirely empty, staring at my own mother. She did not even look apologetic. Instead, she turned on her heel and shoved the plate directly into the hands of Connor, my 34-year-old white brother-in-law. "Let your sister's husband eat first." "Kendra?" My mother announced, her voice deliberately, loud enough to carry over the music and the chatter of our guests. "Connor actually works for a living. He needs his strength for his real career. You can wait your turn." Connor did not decline the plate. He did not offer to share or tell my mother she was being rude. He simply smirked, adjusting the collar of his expensive designer polo shirt, and took a massive bite of the meat. "Thanks, Brenda," he mumbled with his mouth full, looking at me with those patronizing blue eyes that I had come to deeply despise. "I have been putting in 60-hour weeks at the tech startup. It really drains you. I guess when you just do freelance stuff like Kendra, you do not build up much of an appetite." Before I could even process the absolute audacity of his statement, my father Calvin chimed in from his spot by the grill. He flipped a burger aggressively, pointing the greasy metal spatula directly in my direction. "Connor is right, Kendra," my father said, shaking his head in profound disappointment. "You are 35 years old. It is embarrassing. You dropped out of law school 10 years ago, and you are still hustling with some little freelance consulting hobby. You are a financial drain on this family's legacy. Look at Connor. Look at Amanda. They understand what it takes to build wealth. They are moving up in the corporate world. You are just taking up space." I looked around the yard. Several aunts, uncles, and cousins had stopped talking and were openly watching the spectacle, waiting to see if I would break down. This was the exact dynamic I had endured my entire life. Amanda was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one who married the supposedly brilliant tech executive. I was the scapegoat, the failure, the disappointment who walked away from a traditional law degree to forge my own path. They saw my quiet nature, my modest car, and my lack of flashy designer clothes as absolute proof of my poverty. They had no idea that my little freelance hobby had evolved into one of the most ruthless and wildly successful venture capital and corporate restructuring firms on the East Coast. I felt the familiar sting of humiliation prick at the back of my neck, but I did not let it reach my face. 10 years ago, I would have cried. I would have argued. I would have tried to explain my business model and my massive investment portfolios just to beg for a tiny scrap of their respect. But not today. Today, the ice in my veins was absolute. Amanda leaned forward in her padded patio chair, swirling a mimosa in her glass. She flashed her perfect expensive veneers at the gathered crowd. Let us not ruin the party by talking about Kendra's lack of ambition. Amanda purred, dripping with fake, sickening sympathy. We have actual good news to celebrate today. I just got the call yesterday. I secured an executive interview tomorrow morning at Westfield Capital. A chorus of impressed gasps and loud congratulations erupted from my parents and the nearby relatives. My mother clapped her hands together, practically weeping with joy, as she rushed over to hug her favorite daughter. Did you hear that, Kendra? My mother demanded, pointing a sharp acrylic fingernail at me over Amanda's shoulder. They are looking for a senior vice president of operations. Westfield is top tier. They manage billions of dollars. They do not hire just anyone. You should take notes from your sister. Maybe if you paid attention to how a real professional handles herself, you would not be begging for scraps at your age. I looked at Amanda, glowing brightly in the center of everyone's attention. I looked at Connor, carelessly wiping barbecue sauce from his smug face. I looked at my parents, beaming with immense pride at the daughter who constantly lied to them, and the son-in-law who I secretly knew was driving his tech startup straight into the ground. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my career. I simply reached over to the drink station, poured myself a fresh glass of iced sweet tea, and took a slow, deliberate sip. I let the cold liquid wash down my throat as I offered Amanda a tight, perfectly polite smile. Congratulations, Amanda, I said smoothly. Westfield Capital is indeed a very selective firm. I wish you the absolute best of luck tomorrow. As my mother rolled her eyes in disgust and ushered Connor and Amanda toward the premium seating area away from me, I slipped my phone out of my pocket. I opened my messages and typed a quick, secure text to Malik, my brilliant and utterly cutthroat chief operating officer. My sister Amanda is coming in tomorrow for the VP slot, I typed. Give her the VIP treatment. Let her dig her own grave. I want to watch every second. I hit send, slipped the phone back into my pocket, and took another refreshing sip of my tea. The cookout continued around me, loud and obnoxious, but for the first time in my entire life, the noise did not bother me at all. The countdown to their ruin had officially begun. Monday morning arrived with the crisp, quiet elegance that I had meticulously cultivated at Westfield Capital. My penthouse office, sitting 40 stories above the bustling city streets, was a sanctuary of floor-to-ceiling glass, polished mahogany, and absolute silence. It was a stark contrast to the loud, chaotic backyard, where my family had spent the weekend tearing me down. I stood by the window holding a freshly brewed espresso, looking out over the skyline I had conquered. Behind me, the large flat-screen monitor on my wall was divided into multiple security camera feeds, showing the lobby, the elevators, and the main conference room. Right on schedule, the lobby feed showed my sister pushing through the revolving glass doors. Amanda looked like she had stepped off the cover of a corporate fashion magazine, wearing a sharp, tailored suit that I knew she could not actually afford. I watched as she marched straight up to the marble reception desk. Even without audio on that specific feed, I could read her body language. She was tapping her designer fingernails, impatiently glaring at the receptionist, a brilliant young woman named Sarah, who was currently managing 3 phone lines. Amanda visibly scoffed, leaned over the desk, and pointed toward the executive lounge, clearly demanding a coffee. Sarah maintained her professional composure, nodding politely and pointing her toward the waiting area. My office door opened and Malik walked in. At 36, Malik was sharp, relentless, and fiercely loyal. We had built this firm together from the ground up, navigating boardrooms that rarely welcomed people who looked like us. He was dressed in a pristine charcoal suit, holding a sleek tablet. Your sister is quite the character, Malik said, standing beside me to watch the monitor. She just told Sarah that the lobby temperature is completely unacceptable for a candidate of her caliber. She also demanded sparkling water, with lemons, specifically not tap. I took a slow sip of my espresso. Give her the sparkling water, I said softly. I want her completely comfortable before we pull the rug out. Is the conference room ready? Malik tapped his screen. Audio and video are perfectly synced to your desktop. I will run the interview. You just feed me the questions through the earpiece. We watched the screen as Amanda stepped into the elevator. A junior analyst, a young man who had just graduated from an Ivy League program and worked 80-hour weeks for me, stepped in behind her. I watched Amanda look him up and down, her face twisting into a sneer of absolute disgust, as she clearly made a derogatory comment about his off-the-rack suit. The young man just looked away, humiliated. My grip on the ceramic espresso cup tightened. It was one thing for my family to disrespect me. It was an entirely different offense to disrespect my people in my building. Let us get this over with, I told Malik. Tear her resume apart. Malik nodded and headed out. I sat down at my massive desk, put in my wireless earpiece, and unmuted the audio feed from the glass conference room. A few minutes later, Malik walked into the room. Amanda immediately stood up, flashing that same brilliant fake smile she had used at the cookout. She shook his hand enthusiastically, completely unaware that the man standing in front of her was my right hand. Thank you for having me, Amanda practically purred. I have been following Westfield Capital for years. I am a huge admirer of the aggressive acquisition strategies your CEO has been implementing. I truly believe my background makes me the perfect fit for the Senior Vice President of Operations role. I smiled to myself in the quiet of my office. She admired my strategies. How poetic. Malik sat down, opening her file. We are glad you could come in, Amanda. Looking at your resume, it says here that you spearheaded the massive corporate restructuring campaign for the Vanguard Group 3 years ago. That is incredibly impressive. It was a total fabrication. I knew it was a fabrication because I was the one who designed and executed the Vanguard restructuring campaign. I had worked 70 straight days sleeping on an office couch to pull that deal off. Amanda had simply read about it in a financial journal and slapped it onto her resume, assuming no one would check the granular details. Oh, absolutely, Amanda lied without missing a single beat. It was a challenging quarter, but I managed a team of 50 analysts to streamline their supply chain logistics. I practically lived in the office. It took a lot of leadership, but I thrive under that kind of high-stakes pressure. I pressed the small button on my desk microphone. Ask her about the secondary tax loopholes in the Vanguard acquisition, I whispered into Malik's earpiece. Ask her how she navigated the offshore asset freezes. Malik leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. Fascinating, he said smoothly. So, when you were navigating the Vanguard acquisition, how exactly did you handle the secondary tax loopholes regarding their offshore asset freezes? That must have been a logistical nightmare. Through the screen, I watched the color rapidly drain from Amanda's flawless face. Her confident posture stiffened. She blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing as her brain scrambled to invent an answer to a highly complex legal scenario she knew absolutely nothing about. Well, Amanda stammered, shifting uncomfortably in her leather chair. The offshore assets were, they were handled by a separate legal department. I delegated that specific task to ensure maximum efficiency. A good leader knows how to delegate. I pressed the mic again. Push harder. There was no separate legal department. Actually, Malik said, tilting his head slightly. Public records show the Vanguard restructuring did not utilize an external legal department for the offshore assets. The lead strategist handled it directly. Are you saying your resume misrepresents your role in that campaign? Amanda began to sweat. I could see the tiny beads of perspiration forming on her forehead. No, of course not. She laughed nervously, her voice pitching an octave higher. I just mean the overall strategy was collaborative. It was a team effort. Malik closed the file with a soft final thud. I see. Well, Amanda, we take integrity very seriously at Westfield Capital. We will be running a thorough background check on these claims. We will be in touch. The interview was over in less than 20 minutes. Amanda practically bolted from the room, her composure entirely shattered. I took out my earpiece, feeling a deep, satisfying thrill of justice. But the morning was not over yet. My phone buzzed. It was a message from the lobby security desk. Connor, my wonderful, arrogant brother-in-law, had just pulled his least luxury sedan into the circular driveway of the building, parking directly in the fire lane. He was here to take his wife to a celebratory lunch. I stood up, grabbed a casual blazer from the hook on my door, and headed for my private elevator. By the time I reached the grand marble lobby, Amanda was marching toward the exit looking frantic. Connor was standing near the revolving doors checking his gold watch, looking deeply annoyed by the wait. As I walked across the lobby, Connor spotted me. His eyes widened in surprise and then quickly narrowed into that familiar, condescending glare. He nudged Amanda, who looked up and gasped when she saw me. Kendra, Amanda hissed, looking around frantically as if my mere presence would infect her corporate aura. What on earth are you doing here? Do not tell me you are begging for a receptionist job. I am trying to secure an executive position here. You being in this building is completely humiliating for me. Before I could answer, Connor let out a loud, obnoxious sigh. Relax, Amanda. She is probably just a temp or dropping off some coffee order. He stepped into my path, completely blocking my way. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled $20 bill and shoved it toward my chest. Listen, Kendra, since you are clearly just running errands, do something useful. I left my car out front in the loading zone. Go fetch the valet and make sure they do not scratch the paint. Keep the change. Maybe you can buy yourself a decent lunch instead of scrounging off our family cookouts. I looked at the $20 bill in his hand. Then I looked at his smug, entitled face. I calmly reached out and took the money. I smoothed the wrinkled bill between my fingers, smiled warmly at him, and turned on my heel. I walked directly over to the massive security desk, where the head guard, a former Marine named David, was watching the interaction with narrowed eyes. I placed the $20 bill flat on the marble counter. David, I said clearly, my voice carrying across the quiet lobby. There is an unauthorized vehicle parked in the emergency fire lane outside. Please have it towed immediately. And use this 20 to tip the tow truck driver. Yes, ma'am, David said, immediately grabbing his radio. Connor's jaw dropped. Hey, wait a minute, he yelled, taking a step toward the desk. You cannot do that. You do not even work here. I did not look back at him. I simply walked toward the private biometric executive elevator. As I placed my hand on the scanner and the glass doors slid open, Malik stepped out, holding a thick financial folder. He completely ignored Connor and Amanda, who were now watching in absolute stunned silence as the senior partner of the firm handed me documents. You are going to love this, Malik said, handing me the file as the doors began to close. Connor's tech startup is heavily in debt, and Westfield Capital just quietly bought all of their promissory notes. We own them. The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off the sight of Connor sprinting outside just in time to see a tow truck backing up to his precious car. I opened the file, looking at the catastrophic financial numbers of my brother-in-law's company. I smiled. They had wanted to treat me like a servant at the family table. Now I was going to serve them an absolute nightmare. Later that same week, my phone lit up with a text message from my mother. It was Friday afternoon, and I was sitting in my boardroom, finalizing the aggressive audit parameters for Connor's failing startup. The text was short and dripping with her usual condescension. We are celebrating Amanda securing the Westfield Vice President position tonight at Prime Cut Steakhouse. Dinner is at 8. We expect you to be there so you can finally see what real corporate success looks like. Do not wear those cheap sneakers you always walk around in. I smiled at my phone screen, locked it, and told Malik to initiate the audit on Connor's company first thing Monday morning. Then I went home, put on a sleek charcoal dress that cost more than my parents' first car, and headed to the restaurant. Prime Cut was one of the most exclusive and expensive steakhouses in the city. The interior was all dark mahogany, dim lighting, and soft jazz playing in the background. When I arrived at the table, my family was already seated in a plush velvet booth. Amanda was wearing a bright red cocktail dress, loudly ordering a $300 bottle of Cabernet from the sommelier. Connor sat next to her, looking slightly pale, but forcing a tight, arrogant smile. My parents were glowing, hanging on to every word Amanda said as if she were a visiting dignitary. I slid into the empty seat across from my sister. She barely acknowledged me, immediately launching into a completely fabricated story about her interview at my firm. It was incredible, Amanda boasted, taking a delicate sip of her wine. The senior partner who interviewed me was practically begging me to sign right then and there. They were so thoroughly impressed with my restructuring work at Vanguard. He told me the CEO has been searching for someone with my exact leadership caliber for months. They are just finalizing the paperwork, but the six-figure offer is absolutely guaranteed. My mother clapped her hands together in delight. I knew it, she beamed. I always knew you were destined for greatness, Amanda. You have that natural drive. My father raised his heavy crystal glass. Let us make a toast, Calvin announced, his voice booming over the quiet chatter of the restaurant. To Amanda, who is elevating our family name to new heights. And to Connor, whose tech startup is the foundation of their beautiful, wealthy life together. He paused, his eyes sliding over to me with a look of profound pity. And let us hope that seeing this kind of achievement finally inspires Kendra to stop playing around with her little freelance gigs and get a real job. Maybe Amanda can put in a good word for you in the mailroom. They all laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that used to make me want to shrink into the floor and disappear. Tonight, however, it sounded like pure comedy. I raised my glass of sparkling water and gently clinked it against my father's wine glass. I completely agree, I said softly. I think tonight is going to be a massive turning point for everyone at this table. Amanda ordered half the menu. She ordered the imported Wagyu beef, the truffle mashed potatoes, the lobster mac and cheese, and 2 more bottles of the expensive Cabernet. She made a point of telling the waiter that her husband, the successful tech executive, would be taking care of the bill, so they did not need to spare any expense. Connor shifted uncomfortably in his seat every time she ordered another $100 item, but his pride kept him completely silent. By the time the dessert plates were cleared, the table was littered with empty glasses and crumbs. The waiter, a tall man in a crisp white apron, approached the table and placed a black leather checkbook right in front of Connor. I could see the printed receipt sticking out. The total was over $1,200. Connor pulled his chest up, trying to look like the wealthy mogul he pretended to be. He confidently pulled a heavy corporate credit card from his designer wallet and placed it on the tray. Keep the change, he told the waiter with a dismissive wave of his hand. The waiter took the book and walked away. The family resumed talking about the luxurious vacation they were going to plan with Amanda's massive new signing bonus. I just sat there waiting. 5 minutes later, the waiter returned. His professional demeanor was strained. He leaned down and whispered discreetly to Connor. I am so sorry, sir, but this card has been declined. Connor's face flushed deep red. My father stopped talking. Amanda looked at the waiter as if he had just insulted her. That is impossible. Connor snapped, his voice slightly panicked. Run it again. There must be a fraud alert. I travel a lot for business. The waiter politely nodded and walked away. 2 minutes later, he returned. Declined again, sir. Do you have another form of payment? Connor was sweating now. He pulled out a personal credit card and shoved it onto the tray. Try this one. It is a bank error. My accounts are perfectly fine. We sat in agonizing silence. Amanda glared at me as if my mere presence at the table was somehow causing her husband's bank accounts to drain. When the waiter returned for the 3rd time, he did not even try to whisper. He placed the black leather book back on the table. I apologize, sir, but all 3 cards are coming back as insufficient funds. We need to settle this bill immediately. My mother gasped, clutching her pearl necklace. Connor, what is going on? She demanded. Connor was completely panicked, staring at his useless plastic cards. I do not know, he stammered. The startup accounts must be frozen. We were expecting a bridge loan this week. It is just a temporary cash flow issue. Amanda's face contorted in humiliation. Diners at the tables next to us were beginning to stare. Desperate to save face, she violently shoved the black leather checkbook across the table until it hit my plate. You pay for it, Kendra. Amanda hissed, her eyes wide with frantic anger. You have been sitting here eating our food and living in Dad's shadow your whole life. The least you can do is cover a dinner while my husband handles a minor bank error. Empty out whatever little savings account you have. Do something useful for once. My father nodded in agreement. Pay the man, Kendra. Do not embarrass us in front of these people. I looked down at the bill. Then I looked at my sister, whose perfect facade was cracking under the weight of her husband's secret financial ruin. I slowly reached into my clutch and pulled out my wallet. I did not pull out a standard debit card. I pulled out a heavy, solid metal Centurion Black American Express card. the ultimate symbol of limitless, unbridled wealth. I casually dropped the heavy metal card onto the leather checkbook. It landed with a loud, distinct clink that echoed over the table. "Put the entire bill on this," I told the waiter smoothly. "And add a $500 tip for your trouble." The waiter looked at the legendary black card, his eyes widening in shock, and quickly hurried away. My mother stared in the empty space where the card had been, her mouth hanging open. "What was that?" Brenda demanded, her voice shrill. "Did you take out a predatory loan just to get a fancy piece of metal? You are going to ruin your credit just to show off. You are so financially irresponsible, Kendra." Before I could answer her ridiculous accusation, Connor's cell phone began ringing frantically. The screen lit up with his business partner's name. Connor snatched the phone off the table and answered it, desperate for a distraction from his humiliation. "Yeah, what is it?" Connor barked into the phone. I watched his face closely. In a matter of seconds, the red flush of embarrassment completely vanished from his cheeks, replaced by a sickly ghost-white pallor. His jaw dropped. His hand began to shake so violently that he nearly dropped the phone into his water glass. "What do you mean they bought our debt?" Connor whispered into the phone, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "What audit? Who is calling for an audit? We do not have the liquid cash for that. If they freeze our operations, we are completely bankrupt. Who is the primary investor pulling the strings?" He listened for another moment, his eyes darting wildly around the room as his entire fake empire crumbled into dust in real time. He did not know that the primary investor executing the hostile takeover of his company was sitting directly across from him, quietly sipping her sparkling water. I smiled. The dinner was absolutely delicious. Monday morning arrived with a brutal and deeply satisfying clarity. The absolute panic I had witnessed on Connor's face at the steakhouse dinner was just the appetizer. Today was the main course. I stood in my sleek penthouse office at Westfield Capital sipping a double espresso. 40 stories below me, the city was waking up to a brand new work week. But my focus was entirely on the high-definition security monitors and the live video feeds lining my wall. Malik, my chief operating officer, was already sitting in our main glass conference room. He was logged into the emergency virtual board meeting for Connor's failing tech startup. I was patched into the call as the primary shareholder and lead investor, but my video feed was completely disabled, and my voice was running through a highly sophisticated audio modulator. I wanted to watch my arrogant brother-in-law squirm under the intense pressure without him knowing that the sister he despised was the one holding the financial scalpel. Connor appeared on the screen, logging in from his cramped home office. He looked absolutely terrible. His usually pristine designer polo was wrinkled, his face was pale and puffy, and he was sweating profusely. He clearly had not slept a single minute since his credit cards declined at the restaurant. Malik did not waste time with pleasantries. He immediately projected the startup's financial spreadsheets onto the shared screen for the entire board of directors to see. He systematically highlighted the bloated executive expense accounts, the failed bridge loans, and the highly questionable accounting tricks Connor had been using to secretly fund Amanda's lavish lifestyle of designer bags and luxury spa days. The other board members were completely furious, shouting over each other in absolute outrage. Connor was stammering desperately, trying to blame market fluctuations and aggressive competitors. Malik ruthlessly cut him off, his voice ice cold and perfectly steady. "Market fluctuations do not explain $300,000 of missing liquid capital, Connor. Westfield Capital is demanding an immediate corporate restructuring. We are liquidating your department and terminating the entire middle management team effective immediately. Your position is officially eliminated." Connor looked like he was going to vomit. "Please," he begged, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "Give me a 24-hour grace period. My wife is a highly connected executive. She actually just secured a senior vice president role at Westfield Capital on Friday. She has a direct line to your CEO. She can smooth all of this over. Just give me one day to have her speak with your boss." I muted my microphone in the penthouse and laughed out loud. Connor actually believed Amanda's pathetic lies. He truly thought my sister had the power to save his crumbling fake empire. On the screen, I watched Connor frantically typing a text message, undoubtedly begging his wife to march into the Westfield building and use her imaginary corporate influence to call off the auditors. Exactly 30 minutes later, my lobby security feed lit up. Amanda strutted into the Westfield Glass Tower headquarters. She was wearing a ridiculous oversized designer coat and oversized sunglasses, acting as if she already owned the entire building. I watched closely as she marched right up to the marble reception desk. She was immediately rude to Sarah, our brilliant receptionist. Amanda slammed her expensive leather handbag onto the counter, snapped her fingers, and loudly demanded a fresh macchiato while she waited for the CEO to come down and greet her. Sarah maintained a polite, perfectly neutral expression, informing Amanda that she did not have an appointment. Amanda visibly scoffed, rolling her eyes in absolute disgust. While she stood there arguing, a junior analyst walked past the desk carrying a stack of files. Amanda turned and openly mocked him, loudly criticizing his off-the-rack suit and telling him to get out of her way. She was a completely oblivious mouse walking straight into a steel trap demanding to be fed cheese. I stood in my penthouse office watching the monitor with a cold, detached smile. Amanda finally lost her patience and tried to physically push past the biometric security turnstiles. David, the head of security, immediately stepped forward and blocked her path with his large frame. Amanda threw a massive screaming tantrum in the middle of the pristine lobby. "Do you have any idea who I am?" She screeched, her voice echoing off the marble walls and drawing the stares of dozens of employees. "I am the new Senior Vice President of Operations. I demand to speak to your CEO right this instant. My husband's company is currently under a hostile audit by this firm, and I need to call it off. Move out of my way before I have you permanently fired." Right on cue, the doors of my private executive elevator slid open. Malik stepped out into the lobby. He walked calmly and confidently across the marble floor, holding a single manila envelope in his hand. Amanda's face instantly lit up with sheer relief when she recognized the man who had interviewed her. "Oh, thank goodness you are here!" Amanda gasped, smoothing her hair and trying to regain her composure. "Please tell these incompetent security guards who I am. Tell them I am your new colleague. I need to speak with the CEO immediately about an accounting error regarding my husband's tech firm." Malik did not smile. He did not offer his hand. He simply stopped in front of her and handed her the manila envelope. "Ma'am, you do not work here," Malik said, his voice deep and carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet lobby. "This envelope contains your formal rejection letter. You completely failed our mandatory background check due to falsified credentials and a fabricated employment history." Amanda's jaw dropped. The color rapidly drained from her face as she stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "What are you talking about?" she whispered frantically. "That is impossible. I am highly qualified. I demand to see the CEO. I will not leave this building until I speak to the person in charge." Malik tilted his head slightly, looking at her with absolute pity. Furthermore, he continued smoothly, "Our CEO is currently unavailable to entertain you. She is far too busy liquidating your husband's frozen assets and dismantling his department." Amanda began to tremble. Her perfect facade was completely shattering in real time in front of dozens of my silent employees. "Who is your CEO?" Amanda demanded, her voice cracking with terror and confusion. "Who is doing this to us?" Malik offered a polite, devastatingly cold smile. "You will find out at the City Commerce Gala this weekend. She is the keynote speaker. Have a pleasant day, ma'am." Malik turned his back on her and walked away. David and another security guard gently but firmly escorted a weeping, completely disgraced Amanda out the revolving glass doors and onto the busy city sidewalk. I finished the last drop of my espresso and turned away from the security monitors. The first phase of the demolition was entirely complete. Connor was officially unemployed and drowning in corporate debt. Amanda was publicly humiliated and blacklisted from the financial sector. They had absolutely no money and no remaining leverage. But they still had their false pride, and I was going to take that away from them in front of the entire city's elite. The glass conference room at Westfield Capital was designed to be intimidating. It sat in the exact center of the 40th floor, surrounded by transparent walls that offered no privacy from the relentless machinery of the firm. I sat in my penthouse office just down the hall, adjusting the wireless earpiece in my right ear. On my massive desktop monitor, I had a perfect high-definition view of the room. The audio feed was crystal clear. Amanda walked into the conference room with the kind of unearned confidence that only the truly delusional possess. She was wearing a tailored navy suit that screamed new money, her posture rigid and arrogant. She sat down at the long mahogany table and immediately began organizing her portfolio, placing a gold-plated pen next to her leather-bound notebook. She looked around the room, clearly imagining her name on the door, completely oblivious to the fact that she was walking into a slaughterhouse. Malik walked in precisely 2 minutes later. He did not rush. He moved with the calm, predatory grace that made him the most feared chief operating officer in the financial district. He carried a single thin manila folder. He sat down across from my sister, placed the folder on the table, and folded his hands. He did not smile. "Good morning," Amanda Malik said, his voice smooth and utterly professional. "I am the Chief Operating Officer of Westfield Capital. We have reviewed your initial application, and the CEO requested that I conduct this interview personally." Amanda beamed, flashing her perfect veneers. "Thank you so much for taking the time," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I have been following Westfield Capital for years. The aggressive acquisition strategies your CEO has been implementing are truly inspiring. I know my background in high-level corporate management makes me the perfect fit for the Senior Vice President of Operations role." I leaned back in my leather chair and pressed the small silver button on my desk microphone. "Ask her about her time at the Vanguard Group," I whispered into the quiet of my office. "Let us see how deep this lie goes." Malik opened the folder and looked down at her resume. "I see here that you have listed a rather impressive achievement," he noted, his tone perfectly neutral. "It says you spearheaded the massive corporate restructuring campaign for the Vanguard Group 3 years ago. That was a highly publicized and incredibly complex acquisition." Amanda did not hesitate. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, trying to project absolute authority. "Oh, absolutely," she lied smoothly. "It was a challenging quarter, but I managed a team of 50 analysts to streamline their supply chain logistics and handle the asset liquidation. I practically lived in the office for 2 months straight. It took an immense amount of leadership, but I thrive under that kind of high-stakes pressure." I stared at the monitor, my blood running cold. The Vanguard Group restructuring was my crowning achievement. 3 years ago, while Amanda was taking luxury vacations to the Bahamas, funded by my parents, draining their retirement accounts, I was sleeping on a tiny couch in my old office. I had worked 70 consecutive days navigating brutal negotiations and complex legal loopholes to save that deal. And now this woman was sitting in my firm, trying to steal my legacy to get a six-figure salary. "Tear her apart," I whispered into the microphone. "Ask her about the secondary tax loopholes regarding the offshore asset freezes in the Cayman accounts." Malik looked up from the resume, his dark eyes locking onto Amanda. "Fascinating," he said quietly. "So when you were navigating the Vanguard acquisition, how exactly did you handle the secondary tax loopholes regarding their offshore asset freezes? Specifically, the Cayman accounts. That must have been a logistical nightmare given the new federal regulations that were passed that same year." Through the high-definition monitor, I watched the immediate physical reaction. The color rapidly drained from Amanda's flawless face. Her confident posture stiffened, her shoulders rising toward her ears. She blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing as her brain scrambled to invent an answer to a highly complex legal scenario she knew absolutely nothing about. The room was kept at a brisk 68 degrees, but a thin sheen of sweat began to form on her forehead. "Well," Amanda stammered, shifting uncomfortably in her expensive leather chair. "The offshore assets were, they were handled by a separate legal department. I oversaw the big picture. I delegated that specific task to ensure maximum efficiency across the board. A good executive knows how to delegate the minor details." I pressed the microphone button again. "Push harder. Point out that Vanguard did not use external counsel for that acquisition. And ask her about the union negotiations in the Rust Belt manufacturing plants." "Actually," Malik said, tilting his head slightly like a predator examining a wounded animal, "public corporate records show that the Vanguard restructuring did not utilize a separate or external legal department for the offshore assets. The lead strategist handled the Cayman accounts directly to avoid information leaks. Are you saying your resume misrepresents your specific role in that campaign? Amanda's hands began to tremble. She quickly pulled them off the table and hid them in her lap. No, of course not. She laughed nervously, her voice pitching an octave higher than normal. I just mean the overall strategy was highly collaborative. It was a massive team effort, and memories can get a bit blurry with deals that large. I see, Malik replied, making a slow, deliberate mark on the paper with his pen. Let us move on to something more grounded then. During that same restructuring, how did you manage the union negotiations for the Rust Belt manufacturing plants? The Steelworkers Union was notoriously aggressive that quarter. How did you convince them to accept the pension cuts? Amanda swallowed hard. I could see the panic in her eyes now. She was completely out of her depth, drowning in a sea of corporate realities she had only ever read about in magazines. She tried to fall back on generic corporate buzzwords. The union negotiations were tough, Amanda said, her voice shaking slightly. But I believe in open communication. I held several town hall meetings with the union leaders. We synergized our goals and found a compromise that protected the workers while maintaining our bottom line. It was all about creating a positive company culture. I actually laughed out loud in my office. I pressed the mic. Vanguard's manufacturing subsidiary was non-union, I told Malik. They did not have a steelworkers union. Destroy her. Malik slowly closed the manila folder. It made a soft, definitive thud against the mahogany table. That is a truly remarkable story, Amanda, Malik said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. It is especially remarkable considering Vanguard's manufacturing subsidiary was entirely non-union. There were no union leaders. There were no town halls. And there were certainly no pension cuts for steelworkers because they did not employ any. Amanda froze. She looked as if she had just been slapped across the face. The silence in the glass conference room was absolutely deafening. She stared at Malik, her jaw slightly open, completely unable to form a single word of defense. The illusion of the golden child, the brilliant corporate executive, had been entirely shattered in less than 10 minutes. We take integrity very seriously at Westfield Capital, Malik continued, his tone devoid of any warmth or sympathy. We do not tolerate fabricated employment histories, and we certainly do not hire individuals who attempt to steal credit for the grueling work of others. We will be running a comprehensive forensic background check on every single claim you have made here today. Amanda stood up so fast that her chair slammed into the glass wall behind her. She did not bother gathering her gold-plated pen or her leather notebook. She just grabbed her handbag, her hands shaking violently. "Thank you for your time," she whispered, her voice completely broken. She practically sprinted out of the conference room, desperate to escape the humiliating reality of her own incompetence. I took the wireless earpiece out of my ear and set it gently on my desk. I looked at the monitor as Amanda scrambled into the elevator looking like a terrified child. My family had always told me I was the failure, the one who could not succeed. But as I sat in my penthouse office watching my golden child sister run away in absolute disgrace, I knew the truth. They had always been playing a game of pretend. I was the one who built the reality they were about to be crushed under. As the elevator doors closed on the monitor, trapping Amanda in her own humiliation for the 40-story ride down to the lobby, Malik stepped out of the conference room. He walked down the quiet carpeted hallway and entered my office. He tossed the thin manila folder containing Amanda's fabricated resume directly into the metal trash can next to my desk. "She is exactly what you said she was," Malik stated, taking a seat in the leather chair opposite my desk. All flash, no substance, and deeply arrogant, she completely crumbled the second she faced someone who actually knew the Vanguard files. I have never seen a candidate break that fast under pressure. "She has never had to face pressure," I replied, staring at the discarded folder in the trash. My parents spent their entire lives shielding her from the consequences of her own actions. They paid her debts, they covered up her mistakes, and they convinced her that she was a genius simply for existing. They built a fragile glass house around her, and today we just threw the first stone. I watched the silver elevator doors slide shut on the monitor, sealing my sister in her own private box of panic. I turned to Malik, who was still standing by my desk. Let us go downstairs, I said smoothly. I want to see the rest of this play out in person. I grabbed a casual, unlined beige blazer from the hook on my door and slipped it on. We walked out of my penthouse office and stepped into the private executive elevator. The ride down to the main lobby took exactly 30 seconds, but it gave me enough time to compose my features into a mask of absolute indifference. When the frosted glass doors of my elevator slid open, the expansive marble lobby of Westfield Capital was bustling with mid-morning activity. Analysts were rushing by with tablets and clients were waiting in the plush leather seating areas. But my eyes immediately locked onto Amanda. She had just stumbled out of the standard visitor elevator. Her posture, which had been so rigid and arrogant just 20 minutes ago, was completely deflated. She looked frantic, clutching her designer handbag as if it were a life preserver. She was desperately scanning the lobby, probably looking for a quick exit before anyone else could expose her. But before she could reach the revolving glass doors, a man walked through them from the outside. It was Connor. My brother-in-law looked exactly as he always did, the picture of unearned tech bro confidence. He was wearing a fitted designer polo dark jeans and expensive loafers. Through the massive glass walls of the lobby, I could clearly see his silver luxury sedan parked directly against the red curb of the emergency fire lane. He had not even bothered to use the visitor garage. He just left it there, hazards flashing, assuming the rules did not apply to him. Connor spotted Amanda and threw his arms open wide with a massive, arrogant grin. "There she is," he called out, his voice entirely too loud for the professional environment. "There is the new senior vice president, ready for that celebratory lobster lunch I promised you." Amanda flinched. She looked around nervously, terrified that Malik or someone else from the interview room might hear him. She hurried over to Connor and grabbed his arm, trying to physically pull him toward the exit. "Let us just go, Connor," she hissed, her voice trembling. "I am not feeling well. I just want to leave." Connor frowned, looking confused by her sudden urgency. "What are you talking about? Did you not nail it? You said it was a guaranteed offer." Before Amanda could formulate another lie to cover her tracks, Connor looked past her shoulder and made direct eye contact with me. I was standing near the edge of the lobby, adjusting the cuffs of my blazer. I had not said a single word, but my mere presence was enough to ignite his usual hostility. He let out a loud theatrical sigh and shook his head. "You have got to be kidding me," Connor said loudly enough for the nearby security guards to hear. "What on earth are you doing here, Kendra? Did Mom tell you Amanda was interviewing today, so you decided to follow us and beg for a handout?" Amanda spun around. When she saw me, her eyes widened in sheer horror. She was already humiliated from the interview, and now she assumed I was there to witness her rock bottom. "Are you temping here?" Amanda demanded, her voice thick with panic and venom. "If you are working the mailroom, I swear to God, Kendra, you better not tell anyone in this building that we are related. It would completely ruin my professional reputation." I stood perfectly still, letting their insults wash over me like warm water. It was almost fascinating to watch two people who were so financially and morally bankrupt try to assert dominance. Connor chuckled, completely misreading my silence for submission. He reached into his leather wallet, pulled out a crisp $20 bill, and held it up between his index and middle fingers. He took a few steps toward me, holding the money out like a carrot. "Listen, Kendra," Connor said, his tone dripping with patronizing pity. "Since you are obviously just running errands or fetching coffee for the real executives, do something useful for me. I left my car right out front in the loading zone. I do not have time to deal with the parking attendants. Keep an eye on it for me until we finish our lunch. Keep the 20. Maybe you can buy yourself a decent sandwich instead of eating all the ribs at the family cookout." He shoved the $20 bill directly toward my chest, expecting me to take it like an obedient servant. I looked at the $20 bill. Then I looked at Connor's smug, arrogant face. I slowly reached out and took the money from his hand. I smoothed the edges of the crisp bill, looked him dead in the eye, and gave him a chillingly polite smile. "Thank you, Connor," I said softly. "I will make sure your car is taken care of." Connor smirked, turning back to his wife. "See? She is finally learning her place. Let us go eat." As Connor wrapped his arm around a highly agitated Amanda and led her out the revolving doors, I turned on my heel. I walked straight over to the massive front desk where David, our head of security, was standing. David was a towering former Marine who ran my building with absolute precision. He had been watching the entire interaction, his jaw tight with silent anger on my behalf. I placed the $20 bill flat on the polished marble counter. "David," I said clearly. "The silver sedan parked illegally in the fire lane outside. Please call the city impound and have it towed immediately. And use this 20 to buy coffees for the security team." David broke into a wide, satisfied grin. "With pleasure, ma'am. Consider it gone." I turned back towards the elevators just as Malik walked up beside me. He had taken the standard elevator down to give me time to interact with them. He was holding a thick red financial ledger. He watched Connor and Amanda walking down the sidewalk, completely oblivious to the tow truck that was already turning the corner onto our street. Malik handed me the red ledger. "You are going to love this," he said, his voice low and rich with anticipation. I had our analysts run a deep dive while I was conducting the interview. Connor's tech startup is not just struggling. They are heavily in debt and defaulting on their loans. And Westfield Capital just quietly bought all of their promissory notes this morning. I opened the file and looked at the catastrophic financial numbers printed on the first page. Connor had taken out massive predatory bridge loans to fund Amanda's designer lifestyle, and now I owned every single cent of that debt. I closed the ledger and smiled. They wanted me to fetch their car. Instead, I was going to take their entire company. I spent the next 3 days in my penthouse office meticulously dismantling the financial infrastructure of Connor's tech startup. I worked closely with Malik to freeze their credit lines and block any emergency bridge loans they might try to secure. I fully expected that by Wednesday, Amanda would have constructed some elaborate face-saving excuse for why she was not taking the job at Westfield Capital. I figured she would tell our parents that the corporate culture was too toxic or that the salary offer was beneath her standards. I underestimated the sheer bottomless depth of my sister's delusion. On Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed on my desk. It was the family group chat. Amanda had sent a massive block of text accompanied by a selfie of her holding a glass of champagne. The message read, "I absolutely nailed the interview. The Senior Vice President of Operations position is officially mine. They are just drawing up the final paperwork. Prepare to celebrate my new tax bracket." I stared at the screen for a full minute. I was genuinely fascinated by her audacity. She had sprinted out of my conference room in tears, completely humiliated after Malik exposed her fabricated resume. She had been escorted out of the building by my security team. Yet here she was doubling down on the lie to maintain her status as the golden child. She was building a massive glittering castle directly on top of a sinkhole, and she was dragging our parents right in with her. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was my mother. I answered on the second ring, leaning back in my leather executive chair. "We are going out to dinner tonight," Brenda announced, completely bypassing any standard greeting. "Your father is taking us all to Prime Cut Steakhouse downtown. We are celebrating Amanda's massive success. I expect you to be there at 8 o'clock sharp." "That sounds like a very expensive celebration," I replied smoothly, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "Well, success is expensive, Kendra." My mother snapped, her voice dripping with her usual condescension. "That is something you would not understand given your lifestyle. Honestly, I debated even inviting you. But your father and I decided that you need to be there. You need to sit at that table and look at your sister. We are only bringing you along so you can finally learn what real corporate success looks like. Maybe if you see Amanda stepping into a 6-figure executive role, it will motivate you to quit your little freelance hobby and do something meaningful with your life. Do not wear those cheap flat shoes you always wear. Try to look presentable for once." She hung up before I could say another word. I slowly lowered the phone, a cold, sharp smile spreading across my face. I would not miss this dinner for the world. At exactly 8 o'clock, I walked through the heavy mahogany doors of Prime Cut Steakhouse. It was the kind of establishment that catered exclusively to the city's financial elite. The air smelled of aged beef truffles and expensive cigars from the outdoor patio. The lighting was low and moody, reflecting off the crystal chandeliers and the polished brass fixtures. I had dressed meticulously for the occasion, wearing a sleek, understated black designer dress that cost more than my parents' mortgage payment, paired with simple diamond studs. It was the kind of quiet wealth that my family obsessed with flashy logos and cheap status symbols completely failed to recognize. The hostess led me to a large plush velvet booth in the center of the main dining room. My family was already seated holding court as if they owned the restaurant. Amanda was the center of attention wearing a brand new glaringly bright red silk dress and a massive diamond tennis bracelet. I knew for a fact that Connor's credit cards were maxed out, which meant she had likely opened yet another high-interest store line of credit just to buy that outfit for tonight. Connor sat next to her. Unlike Amanda, who was glowing with artificial triumph, Connor looked physically ill. His skin was pale and there were deep, dark circles under his eyes. He kept checking his phone under the table, his knee bouncing anxiously. He was currently watching his tech startup collapse in real time, completely unaware that his wife's new executive salary was a total phantom. "Look who finally decided to show up." My father, Calvin, boomed, motioning for me to sit on the far edge of the booth. "Try not to knock over the wine glasses, Kendra. We ordered the vintage Cabernet." I slid quietly into the booth, folding my hands in my lap. "You all look very festive," I noted, looking directly at Amanda. "Tell me about the interview. It sounds like it was quite the experience." Amanda practically vibrated with smug satisfaction. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the white linen tablecloth. "It was incredible," she boasted loudly, ensuring the tables next to us could hear her. "The chief operating officer interviewed me personally. He was absolutely blown away by my credentials. We spent most of the time discussing my restructuring work at the Vanguard Group. He said my leadership strategies were exactly what the CEO has been searching for." I kept my face completely blank. "Did he really?" I asked softly. "Oh, absolutely." Amanda lied without a single ounce of hesitation. "He practically begged me to sign a contract right there in the room. They are expediting the background check, but he assured me it was just a formality. The CEO is notoriously difficult to please, but apparently she took one look at my file and approved me immediately." My mother clapped her hands together, tears of pride welling up in her eyes. "I always knew you were destined for the top, Amanda. You have the drive and the brilliance that this family needs." The waiter arrived and Calvin waved him down aggressively. "We are celebrating a massive corporate promotion," Calvin announced to the waiter. "Bring us your largest seafood tower, 3 prime ribeyes, the imported Wagyu for my daughter Amanda, and keep this vintage Cabernet flowing. Do not worry about the prices." As the waiter hurried off to place the massive order, Calvin stood up in the booth and raised his crystal wine glass. He looked around the table, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride before his eyes settled heavily on me. "A toast," Calvin said, his voice carrying over the low hum of the restaurant. "To Amanda, the true pride of this family. You have proven that with hard work and real intelligence, you can conquer the corporate world. You are elevating our name. And let this be a lesson to certain other people at this table." He looked directly into my eyes, a sneer forming on his lips. "This is what happens when you do not drop out of school. This is what a real career looks like. Let us hope some of your sister's ambition finally rubs off on you, Kendra. It is exhausting watching you constantly struggle." "Hear, hear," Connor muttered, taking a massive gulp of his wine, clearly desperate to numb his own mounting panic. My mother leaned across the table, pointing her acrylic nail at me. "Take notes, Kendra. This is why we brought you here. Watch how a successful woman carries herself." I picked up my glass of sparkling water. I looked at the golden child who was living a complete fantasy, the father who worshipped a liar, the mother who despised me, and the brother-in-law who was hours away from total financial ruin. I gently clinked my water glass against my father's wine glass. "I could not agree more," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly calm. "Tonight is going to be a masterclass in what happens when you finally get exactly what you deserve. I am taking very careful notes." The massive seafood tower arrived first, a towering structure of crushed ice, fresh oysters, jumbo shrimp, and whole Maine lobsters. My mother immediately pulled out her phone to take photos, loudly instructing Amanda to pose next to the lobster claws so she could post it on her social media. Look at my brilliant daughter Brenda cooed, snapping photo after photo. This is the lifestyle of a true Westfield executive. I quietly ate my side salad and watched the absolute spectacle. When the main courses arrived, the table groaned under the weight of the excess. Amanda had ordered the imported Wagyu beef, which arrived sizzling on a hot stone. Calvin had a massive bone and ribeye, and Connor had ordered the same, though he barely touched it. While my parents and my sister devoured their incredibly expensive meals and drank glass after glass of the vintage Cabernet, Connor sat rigid in his velvet seat. He kept his phone hidden beneath the white linen tablecloth, his thumb frantically scrolling and tapping. Every few minutes his screen would light up with a new notification, casting a pale, sickly glow on his face. I knew exactly what those notifications were. Malik and my financial team were currently executing the hostile takeover of his tech startup. They were freezing his corporate accounts, blocking his vendor payments, and locking him out of the company servers in real time. Connor was watching his fake empire burn to the ground from under the table, but his massive ego prevented him from saying a single word to his wife or his in-laws. As the plates were finally cleared away, Calvin leaned back, patting his stomach with a satisfied sigh. "Best steak in the city," he declared loudly. "Nothing tastes better than success. Do not worry about the tip, Connor. I know you and Amanda are celebrating, but let your old man handle the gratuity tonight." Connor forced a weak, utterly unconvincing smile. "Thanks, Calvin," he muttered, his voice tight. "But I have got the whole bill. It is a business expense anyway. Client networking and all that." The waiter, a tall, impeccably dressed man who had been serving our table all night, approached and placed the sleek black leather checkbook right in front of Connor. I could clearly see the total printed at the bottom of the receipt. It was slightly over $1,200. Connor puffed out his chest, desperate to play the role of the wealthy tech mogul in front of his new executive wife. He casually reached into his designer leather wallet and pulled out a heavy corporate credit card. He dropped it onto the small silver tray with a loud metallic clink. "Keep the change," Connor told the waiter with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Just run it and bring back the receipt." The waiter offered a polite nod, picked up the tray and walked away toward the register. The family immediately resumed their loud, obnoxious conversation about the luxury vacation they were going to plan in the Hamptons with Amanda's massive signing bonus. I sat completely still, taking a slow sip of my sparkling water. The countdown had reached 0. 5 minutes later, the waiter returned. His professional demeanor was strained, his smile replaced by a tight, uncomfortable line. He leaned down and whispered discreetly to Connor. "I am so sorry, sir," the waiter murmured, "but this card has been declined." The conversation at the table abruptly stopped. My father froze with his wineglass halfway to his mouth. My mother gasped softly. Amanda looked at the waiter as if he had just insulted her entire bloodline. "That is completely impossible!" Connor snapped, his voice pitching higher in sudden panic. "Run it again. There must be a fraud alert. I travel a lot for business and sometimes the bank freezes the account for security reasons." The waiter politely nodded and walked away again. Connor wiped a thick bead of sweat from his forehead. "It is just a bank error," he assured the table, offering a strained laugh. "You know how these corporate accounts are. Too much security." Nobody laughed with him. 2 minutes later, the waiter returned holding the black leather booklet out again. "Declined again, sir. Do you have another form of payment we could try?" Connor was visibly shaking now. He ripped his wallet back open and yanked out a personal platinum credit card. "Try this one," he barked, shoving it onto the tray. "And hurry up. We have places to be." We sat in agonizing silence. Amanda glared at me across the table as if my mere presence was somehow causing her husband's bank accounts to drain. I simply raised my eyebrows and took another sip of water, thoroughly enjoying the show. When the waiter returned for the third time, he did not even try to whisper. He placed the black leather book back on the table in front of Connor. "I apologize, sir," the waiter said, clearly loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "But both of your personal cards are coming back as insufficient funds. We need to settle this bill immediately." Insufficient funds. The words hung in the air like a thick cloud of smoke. My mother clutched her pearl necklace, her eyes wide with shock. Calvin stared at Connor, his face turning a deep shade of red. "Connor, what on earth is going on?" My mother demanded, her voice shrill and embarrassed. Connor was completely panicked, staring at his useless plastic cards as if they had betrayed him. "I do not know," he stammered, his eyes darting wildly around the room. "The startup accounts must be temporarily frozen. We were expecting a massive bridge loan to clear this week. It is just a temporary cash flow issue. The bank must have made a mistake." Amanda's face contorted in sheer humiliation. Diners at the tables next to us were beginning to stare, whispering behind their napkins. Her perfect, wealthy facade was cracking under the weight of her husband's secret financial ruin, and she absolutely could not handle it. Desperate to save face and deflect the embarrassment, she violently shoved the black leather checkbook across the table until it hit my plate. "You pay for it, Kendra!" Amanda hissed, her eyes wide with frantic, malicious anger. I looked down at the leather book and then back up at my sister. "Excuse me," I said softly. "You heard me?" Amanda snapped, leaning across the table like a cornered animal. "You have been sitting here all night, eating our food and living rent-free in Dad's shadow your entire life. The absolute least you can do is cover a single dinner while my husband handles a minor bank error. Empty out whatever little savings account you have. Put it on a payment plan if you have to. Just do something useful for this family for once." My father immediately nodded in aggressive agreement. "Pay the man!" "Kendra." Calvin growled, his voice thick with embarrassment. "Do not make us look like fools in front of these people. Take care of the bill right now." I looked at the four of them. They were completely pathetic. They had spent the entire evening mocking my career, tearing down my achievements, and treating me like garbage. And now, the very second their fake wealth evaporated, they expected me to empty my pockets to save their pride. They wanted me to clean up their mess just like I always did when we were growing up. But I was not that little girl anymore. I did not break eye contact with Amanda as I slowly reached into my designer clutch. It was time to show them what real power looked like. My fingers closed around the cool, solid titanium of my Centurion Black American Express card. I pulled it from my clutch and let it drop onto the black leather checkbook. It did not make the light, flimsy plastic sound of a standard credit card. It hit the silver tray with a heavy, distinct thud that echoed over the sudden silence at our table. The waiter, who had been standing awkwardly waiting for someone to produce a working payment method, stared at the card. His eyes widened. "A black Amex is not something you can just apply for. It is strictly by invitation, only reserved for individuals whose net worth and spending habits operate in an entirely different stratosphere." The waiter immediately recognized what was sitting on the tray. He bowed his head slightly, his entire demeanor shifting from annoyed to deeply respectful. "Right away, madam," the waiter said, his voice hushed. He picked up the tray and practically sprinted toward the register. For a moment, nobody at the table spoke. They just stared at the empty space on the tablecloth where the heavy black card had been. Then the immense weight of their own denial kicked in. My mother was the first to break the silence. "What in the world was that?" Brenda demanded, her voice shrill and dripping with accusation. "Did you take out some kind of predatory loan just to get a fancy piece of metal? You are going to ruin your credit just to show off at a restaurant." My father immediately nodded, his face turning red with indignation. "It is completely financially irresponsible, Kendra. You probably maxed out 3 different high-interest accounts just to get that status symbol. This is exactly why you will never build real wealth like your sister. You are wasting your little freelance money on parlor tricks while Connor is dealing with a legitimate banking error." Amanda crossed her arms over her chest, forcing a condescending laugh. "It is honestly pathetic, Kendra. Do you think a flashy piece of metal changes the fact that you dropped out of law school? You are probably going to be paying off this one dinner for the next 5 years." I did not argue with them. I did not try to explain that the card had no preset spending limit, or that my so-called freelance hobby was currently generating 8 figures in annual revenue. I just sat there listening to them desperately try to rationalize how the family failure had just bailed out their golden child's supposedly wealthy husband. They needed to believe I was poor and reckless because if they accepted the truth, their entire carefully constructed family hierarchy would instantly collapse. The waiter returned a moment later, holding the leather booklet with both hands like it was a sacred text. He placed it gently in front of me, along with a sleek silver pen. "Thank you so much, madam," he said warmly. "Take your time." I opened the booklet. I did not even look at the itemized charges. I simply signed my name at the bottom of the $1,200 receipt and added a flat $500 tip on the gratuity line. I closed the book, slid my black card back into my clutch, and stood up from the velvet booth. "The dinner was delicious," I said smoothly, looking down at my completely stunned family. "But I have an early morning tomorrow. Running my little freelance business takes quite a bit of energy. Congratulations again on the new job, Amanda. I am sure you will do exactly as well as you deserve." I turned and began walking toward the front entrance of the restaurant. I could hear them scrambling out of the booth behind me, loudly complaining about my attitude to mask their own deep humiliation. As I reached the grand mahogany doors leading out to the valet stand, Connor hurried past me. His face was buried in his phone, his thumbs swiping frantically across the screen. We stepped out into the cool evening air. The valet attendants were rushing to pull cars around for the departing guests. Just as Connor stepped up to the curb, his phone began to ring loudly. The custom ringtone cut through the ambient street noise. I glanced over and saw his business partner's name flashing urgently on the screen. Connor snatched the phone and pressed it to his ear, his shoulders hunched with severe tension. "Yeah. What is it?" Connor barked into the receiver, trying to sound authoritative but failing completely. I stopped a few feet away, pretending to search my clutch for my keys. I watched Connor closely. Within 3 seconds, whatever thin shred of composure he had left completely evaporated. The blood drained from his face so fast, he looked like he was going to pass out right there on the sidewalk. His mouth fell open and his hand began to shake violently. "What do you mean they are demanding an immediate audit?" Connor choked out, his voice cracking with pure terror. "Who ordered a hostile audit? We do not have the liquid cash to cover that kind of scrutiny right now." He listened for another agonizing moment, his eyes darting wildly around the street, as if looking for an escape route. His breathing became shallow and rapid. "They bought our debt." Connor whispered the words, sounding like ashes in his mouth. "How could the primary investor quietly buy up all our promissory notes without us knowing? If they freeze our operations tomorrow morning, we are completely bankrupt. We will lose everything. Who is the investor pulling the strings? Who is doing this to us?" He stood there, listening to the frantic answer on the other end, but his partner clearly did not know my name. They only knew the name of my holding company. Connor lowered the phone slowly, his eyes wide and vacant. His tech startup, the foundation of his entire arrogant identity, was being systematically dismantled, and he had absolutely no power to stop it. Amanda and my parents walked out of the restaurant a moment later. Amanda immediately marched up to her husband, completely oblivious to his catastrophic meltdown. "Did you get the bank error sorted out?" Amanda asked impatiently, adjusting her bright red designer coat. "We need to stop by the boutique tomorrow. I saw a pair of shoes that would be perfect for my first day at the Westfield executive office." Connor just stared at her, utterly paralyzed by the impending ruin of his entire life. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I walked past them, stepping smoothly into the back of my waiting black town car. Through the tinted window, I watched them standing on the curb. Connor was suffocating under the weight of his destroyed company, while Amanda was still dreaming about a job she would never have. They were entirely trapped in a nightmare of their own making. I tapped the glass, signaling my driver to pull away, feeling nothing but profound, absolute peace. The following Monday morning, the city was draped in a cold, heavy rain, perfectly matching the mood I intended to bring to Connor's doorstep. I arrived at my penthouse office at 6 in the morning, hours before the rest of my staff. I did not sit at my usual executive desk. Instead, I walked into the secure, soundproofed communications room located at the back of my suite. This room was specifically designed for hostile corporate takeovers and international negotiations. It was equipped with state-of-the-art encrypted servers, high-definition monitors, and a highly sophisticated audio modulation system. Today was the day Sentinel Tech, the failing startup that funded my brother-in-law's arrogance, was going to be completely dismantled. By 8 o'clock sharp, my monitor flickered to life. The high-definition camera feed was transmitting directly from Malik's secure laptop. Malik and a team of 4 ruthless forensic accountants from Westfield Capital had just walked uninvited into the Sentinel Tech headquarters. Through the camera, I could see the glaring contrast between our firms. Sentinel Tech was a trendy open-concept playground filled with exposed brick walls, neon motivational signs, and ping-pong tables. It was the exact kind of bloated, aesthetic-driven environment that prioritized the illusion of success over actual revenue. Malik and my accountants, dressed in sharp, immaculate dark suits, looked like grim reapers walking into a children's arcade. They bypassed the panicked receptionist and marched straight into the main glass-enclosed boardroom. The emergency meeting had been called the night before, right after the humiliating steakhouse dinner. Sentinel's board of directors, a group of older, deeply anxious investors, were already seated around the table. And then Connor walked in. He looked absolutely catastrophic. The smug, wealthy tech bro facade he had worn for the past 5 years had completely evaporated over the weekend. His skin was sallow, his eyes were bloodshot with deep purple bags underneath, and his hands were visibly trembling as he pulled out his chair. He was wearing the exact same designer polo shirt he had worn to the steakhouse on Friday night. It was wrinkled and stained, proving he had not been home to sleep or change. He had spent the entire weekend trapped in a nightmare trying to figure out how his company had collapsed overnight. Malik did not wait for introductions. He did not ask for permission to speak. He simply stood at the head of the mahogany table, connected his laptop to the massive presentation screen on the wall, and took absolute command of the room. "Good morning," Malik said, his voice echoing with cold clinical authority. "As you are all aware, Westfield Capital has officially acquired 80% of Sentinel Tech's outstanding debt obligations. We now hold your primary promissory notes. We are not interested in a passive partnership. We are executing an immediate hostile audit of your operational finances. Furthermore, the CEO and primary shareholder of Westfield Capital is attending this meeting remotely to oversee the restructuring." The board members shifted nervously in their expensive leather chairs, casting terrified glances at the camera lens on Malik's laptop. Connor swallowed hard, wiping a thick layer of sweat from his pale forehead. Malik tapped a key, and the first spreadsheet appeared on the massive wall screen. It was a forensic breakdown of the marketing and acquisition department, the exact division Connor was supposedly leading as a senior vice president. The numbers were bathed in bright, glaring red. "Let us begin with gross corporate incompetence," Malik stated smoothly, using a laser pointer to highlight the massive deficits. Over the last 3 fiscal quarters, the marketing division, under Connor's direct leadership, has burned through $4.2 million in venture capital. In that exact same timeframe, client acquisition has dropped by 38%. There have been no successful product launches. There have been 0 successful ad campaigns. The division is not just bleeding money, it is actively suffocating the core business. One of the older board members slammed his hand on the table, glaring violently at Connor. "You told us those campaigns were in the final optimization phase," the board member shouted. "You told us we were weeks away from a massive return on investment. Optimization is a convenient buzzword for doing absolutely nothing," Malik interrupted smoothly. "But the incompetence is only the baseline. Let us look at the expense accounts." Malik tapped another key. The screen transitioned to a highly detailed, itemized list of Connor's corporate credit card charges over the past year. I watched through the monitor as Connor physically recoiled, sinking lower into his chair, as his entire fabricated lifestyle was projected onto the wall for the men who had blindly funded it. "Westfield Capital demands a full explanation for these charges," Malik said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Over $200,000 categorized as client networking. Yet our forensic team traced these charges to 5-star luxury resorts in the Bahamas, high-end designer boutiques in Paris, and weekly dinners at the most expensive steakhouses in the city. There are no client names attached to these receipts. There are no business contracts resulting from these trips. This was not networking. This was a personal slush fund used to maintain a lavish lifestyle on the company dime." The boardroom erupted into absolute chaos. The investors were screaming, demanding answers, threatening immediate lawsuits. Connor was hyperventilating. His eyes darted wildly around the room as the walls closed in on him. It gets worse, Malik said, raising his voice just enough to cut through the shouting. He pulled up the final slide. This is where incompetence crosses the line into embezzlement. The room instantly fell dead silent. The word embezzlement hung in the air like a guillotine. 3 weeks ago, Malik continued, pointing to a highly encrypted bank transfer. A margin call was issued on a personal high-risk investment portfolio belonging to Connor. To cover his personal debt and avoid bankruptcy, Connor authorized the transfer of $85,000 from Sentinel's operational payroll account into a shell vendor account, which was then routed to his personal bank. He intended to pay it back before the end of the month using the bridge loan he assumed the board would approve. But that bridge loan was denied by Westfield Capital. The money is gone. Connor jumped out of his chair, knocking it backward onto the floor. His face was bright red, tears of sheer panic welling in his eyes. "That is a lie," Connor screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Malik. "You are twisting the numbers. I was reallocating funds to protect our vendor relationships. My team failed to optimize the accounting software. It was an administrative oversight, not theft. You cannot prove intent." I leaned forward in my soundproof room and pressed the glowing red button on my microphone. The audio modulation software instantly caught my voice, stripping away my natural tone and replacing it with a deep, robotic, gender-neutral resonance that boomed through the speakers in the Sentinel boardroom. "Your team did exactly what they were directed to do," I said. The phantom voice echoed off the glass walls, silencing everyone in the room. Connor froze, staring at the laptop camera in absolute terror. The board members held their breath, completely intimidated by the disembodied authority of the Westfield CEO. "They hid your incompetence because you threatened to fire them." I continued, my modulated voice slow and methodical. "You did not optimize anything. You stole operational capital to buy expensive dresses for your wife and luxury cars for yourself. You are a parasite draining the lifeblood of a company built by other people's money." The lead investor turned to Malik, his face pale and furious. "What are your demands?" the investor asked quickly, desperate to save whatever was left of his money. "Tell us what Westfield Capital wants to keep this company out of federal bankruptcy court." Malik closed his folder with a sharp, definitive snap. "Westfield Capital will restructure your debt and provide emergency operational funding on one strict condition. We demand the immediate liquidation of the entire marketing department. Every middle management position is hereby eliminated. And we demand the immediate termination of your senior vice president, effective right this second with zero severance package." Connor gasped, clutching his chest, as if he had been physically shot. His job was not just on the chopping block. The blade had already fallen. "No," Connor begged, dropping to his knees, his pride completely shattered in front of the entire board. "Please, you cannot do this. If I lose this salary, I lose my house. I will lose everything. Give me 24 hours. Just one day." "Why should we give a thief a 24-hour grace period?" I demanded through the speakers, savoring every single syllable. "Because my wife can fix this," Connor pleaded, sobbing openly on the boardroom floor. "My wife is Amanda. She is a brilliant corporate strategist. She literally just accepted a senior vice president position at Westfield Capital on Friday. She is starting her new job at your headquarters today. She has direct access to the executive board. If you just let me call her, she can come downstairs and speak to you directly. She can smooth all of this out. We can negotiate a repayment plan. Just let my wife talk to you." I took my finger off the microphone button, muted the feed, and laughed out loud in the quiet of my penthouse. The sheer blinding delusion was a masterpiece. Connor was drowning in the ocean, and he was begging a ghost to throw him an imaginary life preserver. I pressed the button one last time. "We welcome the opportunity to meet your highly connected wife, Connor," I said coldly through the modulator. "Send her to our headquarters. But your termination stands. Pack your desk." Malik closed the laptop, cutting the feed. I sat back in my chair, staring at the black screen. Connor was officially ruined. And now, in his absolute desperation, he was going to force Amanda to walk right back into the lion's den. I did not need to be inside their heavily mortgaged luxury townhouse to know exactly how the next hour played out. Connor was entirely predictable, a coward running entirely on panic. After Malik's security team firmly escorted him out of the Sentinel Tech building, Connor found himself standing on the sidewalk in the freezing rain. His leased luxury sedan had been impounded 3 days prior, thanks to my $20 tip to the lobby guard. Stripped of his keys, his corporate credit cards, and his dignity, my arrogant brother-in-law was forced to wait 20 minutes in the pouring rain for a budget rideshare to take him home. By the time Connor burst through the custom mahogany front doors of their suburban home, he looked like a drowning victim. His expensive polo shirt was plastered to his skin, dripping cold rainwater all over the pristine hardwood floors. He was gasping for air, his chest heaving as if he had sprinted the entire 10 miles from the financial district. Amanda was sitting in the massive open-concept living room, completely oblivious to the hurricane of ruin making landfall in her hallway. She was lounging on a white Italian leather sofa, wearing a silk robe and sipping a glass of imported sparkling water. Her laptop was resting on her knees. She had spent the entire morning aggressively online shopping, filling a digital cart with thousands of dollars worth of designer office decor for the executive suite she falsely believed she had secured at Westfield Capital. When Connor stumbled into the living room, Amanda did not drop everything to comfort her husband. Instead, she let out a sharp gasp of sheer annoyance, glaring at the puddle of water forming around his ruined leather loafers. "Connor? What on earth are you doing?" Amanda snapped, gesturing wildly at the floor. "You are dripping freezing water all over the custom rug. Take those shoes off immediately. Why are you home in the middle of the day? You're supposed to be finalizing that bridge loan for your startup." Connor did not take his shoes off. His knees simply gave out. He collapsed onto the expensive white rug, burying his face in his hands as a violent, pathetic sob ripped through his chest. "It is gone!" Connor choked out, his voice completely hollowed out by terror. "The bridge loan was denied. Everything is gone, Amanda." Amanda slowly closed her laptop, her intense annoyance shifting into a sharp, rigid confusion. "What do you mean it is gone?" she demanded, setting the computer on the glass coffee table. "Stop crying like a child and speak clearly. Did the bank freeze the accounts again? I told you to call the branch manager this morning." "It is not the bank," Connor yelled, looking up at her with wild, bloodshot eyes. "We were subjected to a hostile audit at 8 o'clock this morning. A massive private equity firm bought up every single one of our promissory notes over the weekend. They own all of our debt. They marched right into the boardroom, completely locked down our financial servers, and audited my entire department in front of the primary investors." Amanda felt a cold, sharp spike of anxiety pierce her chest, but she maintained her arrogant posture. "Well, that is just corporate restructuring," she said dismissively. "You are a senior vice president. Just negotiate a repayment schedule. Tell them about your upcoming marketing campaigns. You can charm these private equity people." "They fired me!" Connor screamed, his voice cracking in absolute despair. "They did not want to negotiate. They humiliated me in front of the board. They exposed the expense accounts. They found out about the money I transferred to cover my personal margin calls. They liquidated my entire division and terminated my contract effective immediately with zero severance. We have absolutely no income, Amanda. We cannot pay the mortgage on this house next week. We cannot pay the lease on your car. We are completely bankrupt." Amanda stared at her husband, the color draining from her perfectly manicured face. The glittering, wealthy illusion she had spent years building was violently shattering right in front of her. But the true horror did not hit her until Connor spoke his next sentence. "You have to save us," Connor begged, crawling forward on the rug and grabbing her hands. "You are the only one who has the power to fix this." Amanda tried to pull her hands away, a sickening feeling twisting in her stomach. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. "How am I supposed to fix a hostile corporate takeover?" "Because the firm that bought our debt is Westfield Capital," Connor cried, gripping her hands tighter. "Westfield Capital executed the audit. It is your new company, Amanda. You just told your parents on Friday that you secured the senior vice president role. You told the entire family that the executive board loved you. You said you had a direct line to the CEO. Amanda's heart completely stopped. The name of the firm echoed in her ears like a death knell. Westfield Capital, the exact same building where she had been ruthlessly interrogated, humiliated, and physically escorted out by security just 3 days prior. The firm where she had completely fabricated her resume. She had spent the entire weekend lying to her parents, lying to her friends, and lying to the husband currently weeping at her feet, claiming she was a triumphant executive. Connor did not notice her utter paralysis. He was entirely consumed by his own desperation. "I told the auditors about you," Connor continued frantically. "I told the Westfield chief operating officer that my wife was a newly appointed senior vice president at his own firm. I begged them to let me call you. They said they would be willing to speak with you. You need to call the CEO right now, Amanda. Call your boss. Demand that they reinstate my department. Tell them we are a power couple. You can make this go away." Amanda was completely trapped. She was standing on a trapdoor and Connor was handing her the rope. If she told him the truth, if she admitted that she was laughed out of the Westfield conference room and rejected for lying about her credentials, Connor would realize she was a total fraud. He would realize there was no six-figure signing bonus coming to save them. Her parents would find out she failed. The intense, blinding narcissism that had defined her entire life absolutely refused to allow that confession. Delusion is an incredibly powerful narcotic. Faced with the absolute destruction of her ego, Amanda's brain violently rejected reality. Instead of confessing, she doubled down. She convinced herself that the chief operating officer who interviewed her was just a rogue, incompetent manager. She convinced herself that if she could just bypass him and march directly into the Westfield executive suite, she could charm the mysterious CEO in person. She would demand the job, demand her husband's reinstatement, and save her perfect image. Amanda pulled her hands away from Connor and stood up. She smoothed the front of her silk robe, forcing her face into a mask of absolute terrifying confidence. "Stop groveling on the floor, Connor," Amanda commanded, her voice turning cold and sharp. "You look pathetic." Connor looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. "Are you going to call them?" "I am not going to call them," Amanda said, turning toward the grand staircase. "I am going to go down there in person. This is exactly why you need a woman with real corporate leverage. Clearly, there has been a massive miscommunication between the acquisition team and the executive board. I will march directly into the CEO's office and put an immediate stop to this ridiculous audit. They are not going to treat the husband of an incoming executive this way. I will handle it." Connor let out a massive sigh of relief, slumping back against the sofa as if a physical weight had been lifted off his chest. "Thank God," he whispered. "I knew you could fix this. Tell them I expect a full apology for how they spoke to me in that boardroom." Amanda did not reply. She marched upstairs to her massive walk-in closet. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she ignored the rising panic in her chest. She pulled out her most aggressive, expensive power suit, a stark white designer ensemble that screamed authority. She applied her makeup with militant precision, slipping on a pair of designer heels and grabbing her leather handbag. She walked past her husband without another word, stepped into the garage, and got into her luxury SUV. As she reversed out of the driveway and sped toward the financial district, she repeated her lies out loud to the empty car, practicing the demands she was going to make. She was driving directly back to the very building that had already rejected her, fully intending to gaslight an entire billion-dollar investment firm into giving her exactly what she wanted. She had absolutely no idea that I was waiting for her. I was sitting at my desk watching the high-definition lobby feed when the sleek glass doors of Westfield Capital swung open. The heavy rain outside was still pouring, casting a gloomy gray light over the city, but inside my building the lighting was pristine and unforgiving. Amanda marched through the revolving doors, completely drenched, but radiating a toxic, frantic energy. She was wearing her stark white designer power suit, the fabric now dotted with rain, and carrying her expensive leather handbag like a weapon. I leaned forward in my leather executive chair, resting my chin on my hands. I had anticipated this exact reaction. Narcissists do not retreat when they are caught in a lie. They attack. They try to bend reality to their will through sheer volume and intimidation. I watched with absolute fascination as my sister attempted to gaslight a billion-dollar corporate fortress. Amanda did not even bother stopping at the reception desk to speak with Sarah. She completely ignored the visitor protocol and marched straight toward the biometric security turnstiles that separated the public lobby from the executive elevators. These turnstiles required a highly encrypted employee badge, or a pre-authorized fingerprint scan to open. Amanda possessed neither. She slammed her hip against the heavy glass barrier, expecting it to effortlessly swing open for her. It did not budge. A loud, sharp electronic beep echoed through the lobby, flashing a bright red denied light on the scanner. Amanda stepped back, glaring at the machine as if it had personally insulted her. She slapped her hand against the scanner pad, trying to force the glass open. Again, the machine blared a loud, abrasive rejection tone. Several employees waiting in the lobby turned their heads, their conversations halting as they watched this strange woman fighting with the security gates. "Excuse me, ma'am," a deep, authoritative voice called out. "David." My towering head of security stepped directly into her path. He stood with his hands neatly folded behind his back, his posture rigid and unyielding. "You are not wearing an employee badge, and you are not on the authorized visitor list for today. I need you to step away from the executive turnstiles immediately." Amanda whipped her head around, her eyes flashing with pure, unadulterated rage. She looked David up and down, her lip curling into a sneer of absolute disgust. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Amanda shrieked, her voice echoing off the high marble ceilings. "I am the newly appointed Senior Vice President of Operations for this firm. I am an executive. This stupid machine is malfunctioning because Human Resources obviously has not updated my biometric file yet. Now open this gate right now, or I will personally see to it that you are standing in the unemployment line by 5 o'clock this afternoon." David did not even blink. He had dealt with angry corporate executives before, and he knew exactly how to handle a tantrum. "Ma'am, I manage the security clearance for every single executive in this building. I know all of them by name and by face. You do not work here. Now you can leave voluntarily, or I can have my team physically remove you from the premises for trespassing." The threat of being physically dragged out of a corporate lobby completely shattered whatever thin veneer of sanity Amanda was still clinging to. She lost her mind. She threw a massive screaming tantrum right there on the polished marble floor. "I demand to speak to your CEO!" Amanda screamed, stamping her designer heel violently against the floor. She pointed a shaking finger directly at David's chest. "Your firm just launched an illegal hostile audit against my husband's tech company. You fired him without cause. I am here to fix this massive administrative error. Get your CEO down here right this instant. I am not leaving this building until the audit on Sentinel Tech is completely called off. I have direct access to the board. I will have you fired. I will have this entire security staff replaced." The entire lobby had gone dead silent. Dozens of analysts, junior partners, and visiting clients were standing frozen, staring at the woman having a complete psychological meltdown at the security gates. Up in my penthouse, I pressed the intercom button on my desk. "Send Malik down," I said quietly. "End this." A moment later, the frosted glass doors of the private executive elevator slid open. Malik stepped out into the lobby. The crowd of onlookers immediately parted for him. He walked with that slow, predatory grace that made him so terrifying in the boardroom. He was holding a single crisp manila envelope in his right hand. Amanda spotted him instantly. The sheer, blinding relief that washed over her face was almost comical. She actually believed he was coming down to rescue her. She completely ignored the fact that this was the exact same man who had dismantled her fabricated resume just days prior. "Oh, thank God!" Amanda gasped aggressively, pushing past David and rushing toward Malik. "Tell this completely incompetent security guard who I am. Tell him I am an incoming executive. I need you to take me up to the CEO's office immediately. There has been a terrible mistake regarding an audit on my husband's company, and I need to handle it." Malik stopped 2 feet in front of her. He did not smile. He did not offer a polite greeting. He simply looked at her with cold, clinical detachment, like a scientist examining a deeply flawed specimen. He slowly extended his arm, holding the manila envelope out to her. Amanda looked at the envelope confused, before tentatively reaching out and taking it. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly as her false confidence began to crack. "Ma'am, you do not work here," Malik said. His voice was low, but it carried perfectly across the silent lobby. "That envelope contains your formal rejection letter. You failed our mandatory corporate background check due to completely falsified credentials and a fabricated employment history." Amanda gasped, taking a sudden step backward. She clutched the envelope to her chest as if it were burning her skin. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and pale beneath the harsh lobby lights. "No," she whispered frantically. "That is not true. I am highly qualified. I have an impeccable record." "You lied on your resume," Malik stated smoothly, refusing to let her hide. "And you lied to your husband." Amanda's eyes widened in sheer terror. She looked around at the dozens of faces staring at her. The humiliation was absolute. The glittering facade of the golden child had just been publicly ruthlessly pulverized. "But I have to see the CEO," Amanda begged, her voice cracking as genuine, desperate tears began to spill down her cheeks. "You do not understand. My husband's company is being liquidated. We are going to lose our house. I just need 5 minutes with the CEO to negotiate a repayment plan. Just 5 minutes, please." Malik tilted his head slightly, offering her a devastatingly polite smile. "I am afraid that is completely impossible," he said. "Our CEO is far too busy liquidating your husband's frozen assets to see you today." Amanda let out a choked, breathless sob. The reality of her total destruction had finally hit her. She was not a powerful executive. She was a fraud, and the people holding her husband's debt knew exactly who she was. "Who is it?" Amanda demanded, her voice rising into a hysterical shriek. "Who is the CEO of this firm? Who is doing this to us? Why are you targeting my family?" Malik turned around, preparing to walk back to the private elevator. He paused, looking over his shoulder at the weeping, broken woman standing in the lobby. "You will find out exactly who is running this firm at the Commerce Gala this weekend," Malik said calmly. "She is the keynote speaker. You will see her there. Have a pleasant afternoon, ma'am." Malik stepped back into the elevator, and the glass doors slid shut. Amanda was left standing completely alone in the center of the massive lobby. She looked down at the rejection letter in her hands, her shoulders shaking with violent sobs. David stepped forward, placing a firm, heavy hand on her shoulder, and gently but forcefully guided her toward the revolving doors. I watched the monitor as my sister was escorted out of my building and pushed back into the freezing rain. She stumbled onto the wet sidewalk, completely ruined, with absolutely nowhere left to hide. I leaned back in my chair and took a deep, steadying breath. My parents had bought tickets to the Commerce Gala months ago, eager to network and show off Amanda's imaginary success to the city's elite. They were expecting a night of champagne and celebration. Instead, they were going to get a front-row seat to their own absolute destruction. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of crisp electric energy that only exists right before a massive storm. The annual City Commerce Gala was the absolute pinnacle of the financial social calendar. It was held in the grand ballroom of the historic Plaza Hotel, a sprawling architectural masterpiece filled with massive crystal chandeliers, vaulted gold leaf ceilings, and walls lined with imported mirrors. It was a glittering sea of diamonds, tailored tuxedos, and ruthless corporate ambition. I arrived 2 hours before the general admission doors opened. I did not wait in the winding line wrapped around the block. I was escorted directly through the private entrance and into the roped-off VIP lounge reserved exclusively for the evening's keynote speaker and the city's highest-ranking executives. I stood near the velvet ropes holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne. I was wearing a breathtaking, custom-tailored emerald green silk gown that cascaded flawlessly to the floor. The deep jewel tone contrasted sharply with the blindingly expensive understated diamond choker resting against my collarbone. I felt completely at peace, watching the massive ballroom slowly fill with the city's elite as the string quartet began playing softly in the background. My parents had purchased their general admission tickets months ago. I knew for a fact they had put the $4,000 expense on a high-interest credit card they could barely afford to pay off. They did not buy the tickets to support local charities. They bought them strictly to network, to take photos for their social media, and to aggressively show off Amanda to anyone who would listen. Through the sea of black tuxedos and sparkling dresses, I finally spotted them entering the main floor. My mother Brenda walked slightly ahead, her chin tilted up in an attitude of absolute unearned superiority. She was wearing a heavily beaded silver dress that was entirely too loud for the elegant setting. My father Calvin walked tightly beside her, puffing his chest out and scanning the room for any important investors he could corner and bother. But it was the couple trailing behind them that truly captured my attention. Connor and Amanda looked like they were walking to their own execution. The contrast between my parents' oblivious arrogance and my sister's sheer terror was absolutely beautiful to witness. Connor was already sweating through his rented tuxedo. His skin was gray, his eyes bloodshot and darting around the room as if he expected federal agents to arrest him at any moment. He was currently watching his tech startup get completely liquidated by my firm, and he had absolutely no idea how he was going to survive the week. Amanda looked even worse. The golden child was entirely hollowed out. She was wearing a black designer gown, but her posture was completely broken. She kept her head down, her hands tightly clutching her evening bag. She was terrified. She knew that the Westfield Capital executives would be attending this gala. She was paralyzed by the fear that she might run into Malik, the man who had handed her a rejection letter, and exposed her fabricated resume in the middle of a crowded lobby. She was drowning in the massive lie she was still telling our parents about being a newly appointed senior vice president, and the weight of that lie was physically crushing her. As they made their way toward the center of the ballroom, my mother suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes locked onto the VIP lounge. Her gaze swept over the velvet ropes, the private bar, and the armed security guards standing at the entrance. And then her eyes landed directly on me. I saw her jaw drop. Her face instantly contorted from practiced elegance into a mask of sheer venomous outrage. She aggressively tapped Calvin on the shoulder, pointing a sharp acrylic fingernail in my direction. Calvin squinted, his face turning red the second he recognized me standing on the other side of the velvet rope. Without a moment of hesitation, Brenda abandoned her networking plans and marched aggressively across the ballroom floor, dragging the miserable rest of the family right behind her. She did not care who she bumped into. She shoved past a waiter carrying a tray of appetizers and marched straight up to the velvet rope, separating the general admission floor from my private lounge. "What on earth do you think you are doing?" Brenda hissed, her voice sharp and incredibly loud. A heavy-set security guard immediately stepped forward to block her path, raising his hand to push her back. I simply smiled, caught the guard's eye, and gave him a subtle nod to let her speak. He stepped back but kept his eyes locked on my mother. I took a slow sip of my champagne. "Good evening, Mother. You look very festive tonight." "Do not play games with me, Kendra," Brenda snapped, gripping the velvet rope with both hands as if she wanted to rip it out of the heavy brass stanchions. "How did you get in here? Did you slip in through the kitchen loading dock when the catering staff was not looking? Did you find a back door left open?" I tilted my head slightly, looking at her with mild amusement. I walked through the front door just like everyone else. Calvin stepped up beside her, glaring at my custom emerald gown with absolute disgust. "Stop lying, Kendra," Calvin growled, keeping his voice low but completely laced with poison. "General admission tickets to this event are $2,000 a plate. We know for a fact you do not have that kind of money. You are completely embarrassing us. You bought some cheap knockoff dress, sneaked into the most prestigious financial event of the year, and now you are standing in the VIP section trying to steal free champagne and crab cakes." "It is honestly pathetic," Brenda chimed in, looking me up and down. "You are deliberately trying to ruin your sister's big night. Amanda is stepping into a massive executive role. She is going to be networking with billionaires tonight. If any of her new Westfield Capital colleagues see her deadbeat sister sneaking around the VIP lounge pretending to be important, it will completely destroy her professional reputation." I shifted my gaze from my furious parents to my sister. Amanda was standing a few feet behind them. When our eyes met, she completely froze. She looked at my gown, she looked at the heavy diamond choker around my neck, and she looked at the armed guard standing at my absolute disposal. A flicker of deep, profound confusion flashed across her face, followed instantly by a wave of sickening dread. She swallowed hard, taking a small step backward, instinctively trying to hide behind her husband. Connor, meanwhile, was not paying attention to the conversation at all. He had immediately flagged down a passing bartender and grabbed 2 glasses of straight bourbon, throwing the first one back in a single gulp. He was drinking to numb the absolute terror of his impending bankruptcy, completely unaware that the architect of his ruin was standing less than 5 feet away. "You need to leave right now," Brenda commanded, her voice growing louder and drawing the attention of several wealthy guests standing nearby. "Put that glass down, walk out the back exit before security throws you out, and go back to your little freelance life. Do not make me call the event organizers." I took another deliberately slow sip of my champagne. I let the silence stretch, allowing her loud, obnoxious demands to hang awkwardly in the elegant air of the ballroom. I looked at the golden child trembling in the background, and then back to the mother who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel completely invisible. "I am not going anywhere, Mother," I said softly, my voice carrying a terrifyingly calm authority. "I was invited, and I highly suggest you lower your voice. You are making a scene in a room full of people who actually matter." Brenda gasped, clutching her chest as if I had physically struck her. "You ungrateful, arrogant little brat," she snarled. But before she could launch into another loud, humiliating tirade, Connor suddenly pushed his way to the front of the group. The bourbon had hit his empty stomach, mixing violently with his sheer desperation and completely obliterating his filter. He glared at me, his eyes dark and swimming with aggressive, drunken rage. He had lost everything, and he was desperately looking for a punching bag. Connor shoved his way past my father, nearly knocking a passing waiter completely off balance. The smell of cheap bourbon and sour sweat radiated off him in waves, entirely ruining the delicate scent of expensive perfume that filled the VIP area. His rented tuxedo jacket was unbuttoned, his bow tie hanging loosely around his neck. He looked like a man who had spent the last 3 days falling down a very long, very dark flight of stairs. "What are you smiling at?" Connor slurred, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger directly at my face. "You think this is funny, Kendra? You think because you rented a nice dress for one night you can look down on us?" "Connor, lower your voice," my father hissed, grabbing his son-in-law by the arm. "People are staring at us." But Connor violently yanked his arm away. The alcohol had completely bypassed his rational brain and gone straight to his massive, bruised ego. He was a man drowning in millions of dollars of corporate debt, utterly powerless against the faceless investment firm that was currently tearing his life apart. He desperately needed someone to feel smaller than him. He needed his usual punching bag. "No, I will not lower my voice," Connor shouted, stepping so close to the velvet rope that the security guard immediately put a hand on his holster. "Look at her, Calvin. Look at this complete fraud. She comes in here sneaking into the VIP section, pretending she is part of this world. She is a dropout. She is a nobody who plays on her computer all day while real men build real companies." The sheer irony of his statement was almost too delicious to bear. The man who had embezzled payroll funds to buy designer shoes was lecturing me about building real companies. I did not blink. I did not step back. I just looked at him with the cold, detached fascination of a scientist observing a dying insect. Connor leaned over the velvet rope, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "You have always been jealous of Amanda." He spat the venom thick in his throat. "You have always hated her because she is everything you are not. She is beautiful, she is brilliant, and she is successful." I glanced past Connor to look at Amanda. She was standing frozen behind my mother, looking as if she were about to physically collapse. Her eyes were wide with sheer terror. She knew exactly what Connor was about to do, and she knew there was absolutely no way to stop him. "Do not ignore me when I am talking to you," Connor roared, slamming his open palm down hard on the brass stanchion. The loud smack echoed sharply across the grand ballroom. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing mid-measure. The low, sophisticated hum of hundreds of wealthy guests networking completely ceased. Every single head in the immediate vicinity turned toward our corner of the room. Billionaire investors, tech moguls, and managing partners of the city top law firms all stopped what they were doing to watch the sweaty, intoxicated man having a complete meltdown at the edge of the VIP lounge. "Connor, please stop." Amanda whispered, her voice cracking, as she finally stepped forward and grabbed the back of his jacket. Everyone is watching us. Let us just go to the bar. Connor shook her off with aggressive force. Let them watch, he yelled, gesturing wildly to the crowd. Let them see what a pathetic liar your sister is. She is trespassing. My mother, finally realizing that her precious networking opportunity was rapidly turning into a massive public humiliation, tried to intervene. Connor, that is enough, Brenda whispered fiercely, looking around at the staring elite. You are making a spectacle. We are here to celebrate Amanda's new job. Connor completely ignored her. He turned his attention to the large, heavily armed security guard standing next to me. Do your job, Connor barked at the guard. Throw this woman out. She does not belong here. She does not have a VIP pass. She is a complete nobody. The security guard did not move a single muscle. He simply looked at me, waiting for an instruction. I gave him a subtle shake of my head, signaling him to stand down. I wanted Connor to dig the hole as deep as humanly possible. Did you hear me? Connor screamed, his voice breaking as the alcohol and the sheer panic of his ruined life completely took over. I am commanding you to remove her from this building. My wife is an executive. She is the new senior vice president of operations at Westfield Capital. We are the elite of this city. We are the ones who belong here. You work for people like us. Throw this piece of trash out onto the street where she belongs. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. My wife is an executive at Westfield. You are just a nobody. The absolute silence in the ballroom was deafening. The city elite watched the spectacle with a mixture of disgust and dark amusement. I could see Malik standing near the edge of the crowd, dressed in a flawless tuxedo, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face as he watched Connor publicly hang himself. Amanda put her hands over her face completely, unable to bear the humiliation of her massive lie being screamed to a room full of people who actually worked in the financial sector. She knew there were Westfield Capital employees in this very room who knew exactly who she was and what she had done. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself against his ridiculous threats. I simply looked at Connor, studying the pathetic, sweaty mess of a man who had tried to treat me like a servant just a few days ago. Then I slowly raised my left wrist. I pulled back the sleeve of my custom emerald gown and looked at my heavy diamond-encrusted watch. It was exactly 8 o'clock. You are making a terrible mistake, Connor, I said softly, my voice perfectly calm and carrying clearly in the quiet room. You are writing checks that your reality cannot possibly cash. What did you just say to me? Connor growled, balling his hands into tight fists. I will have you arrested. I will call the police myself. You will not need to call anyone, I replied, lowering my wrist, because your time is entirely up. Just as Connor opened his mouth to scream another drunken insult, the grand ballroom lights slowly dimmed. The spotlight hit the massive stage at the far end of the room. A deep, authoritative voice echoed through the state-of-the-art sound system, cutting through Connor's pathetic tantrum and commanding the absolute attention of every single person in the building. It was time for the keynote address. The execution was about to begin. The grand ballroom lights faded into a dramatic, sweeping darkness, leaving only the soft ambient glow of the crystal chandeliers and a single powerful spotlight aimed directly at the center stage. The sudden shift in atmosphere acted like a physical weight, instantly silencing the room. The low hum of networking, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the obnoxious drunken shouting from my brother-in-law completely ceased. A tall, distinguished man in a tailored tuxedo stepped up to the acrylic podium. He was the master of ceremonies, a highly respected billionaire philanthropist. He tapped the microphone twice. The sharp, crisp sound echoed through the state-of-the-art audio system, demanding absolute attention. Ladies and gentlemen, the master of ceremonies began, his deep voice washing over the silent crowd. We are gathered here tonight to celebrate the architects of our city. The innovators, the ruthless pragmatists, and the visionaries who build empires from the ground up. Tonight, we have the distinct honor of hearing from a leader who has fundamentally reshaped the financial district. I stood perfectly still behind the velvet rope of the VIP lounge. Connor was still standing inches away from me, his mouth hanging open mid-insult, his confused bloodshot eyes darting toward the stage. My mother and father were frowning, irritated that the keynote address had interrupted their attempt to have me thrown out of the building. Amanda was staring at the floor, clutching her purse, just wishing the night would end. Just this morning, the master of ceremonies continued, his voice echoing with profound respect. Her firm made headlines across the country by executing a flawless, aggressive acquisition of Sentinel Tech, stepping in to completely restructure a failing enterprise and protect the integrity of our tech sector. At the mention of Sentinel Tech, Connor stopped breathing. His entire body went completely rigid. He slowly turned his head away from the stage and looked back at me. The sheer blinding alcohol in his system was suddenly no match for the absolute terror flooding his veins. "She is a titan of industry," the master of ceremonies declared, raising his hand toward the VIP lounge. "Please join me in welcoming the founder and chief executive officer of Westfield Capital, Kendra." A second blindingly bright spotlight snapped on, sweeping across the massive ballroom floor and landing directly on me. The brilliant white light illuminated my custom emerald gown and the heavy diamonds resting against my collarbone. For 5 seconds, the silence in our corner of the room was so absolute, so heavy, it felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the building. The color completely and instantly drained from my family. Brenda dropped her silver designer clutch. It hit the marble floor with a sharp crack, spilling her lipstick and keys, but she did not even blink. Calvin staggered backward, physically bumping into a waiter, his eyes wide and completely uncomprehending. Amanda let out a soft, choked whimper, her hands flying up to cover her mouth as the devastating reality of her entire fabricated life crashed down on her all at once. Connor simply stared at me. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. The woman he had just ordered security to throw out on the street, the woman he had spent years mocking as a penniless dropout, was the exact same billionaire titan who had just liquidated his entire existence. I did not look at them. I did not need to. Their absolute destruction was already complete. I calmly handed my crystal champagne flute to the heavily armed security guard, who offered me a deep, respectful nod. I stepped past the velvet rope and began my walk to the stage. The ballroom erupted into deafening applause. Hundreds of the wealthiest, most powerful people in the city stood up from their tables, clapping and cheering as I glided past them. I walked with my head held high, my posture impeccable, feeling the immense, undeniable weight of the empire I had built with my own 2 hands. I climbed the steps to the stage and stepped behind the acrylic podium. I looked out over the sea of faces. In the far back corner, illuminated only by the ambient light of the exit signs, I could see my family standing exactly where I had left them. They looked like statues, completely paralyzed by shock. "Thank you," I said into the microphone. My voice, calm and melodic, echoed flawlessly through the massive room. When I started Westfield Capital 10 years ago, I was told that I did not belong in this room. I was told that my vision was a hobby, that my ambition was an embarrassment, and that I lacked the pedigree to sit at the table with the corporate elite. I paused, letting my eyes sweep the crowd, intentionally locking eyes with a few of the older traditional investors who had initially rejected my proposals years ago. But true power does not ask for a seat at the table. I continued, my tone shifting from reflective to razor-sharp. True power simply buys the building. It identifies the rot, cuts out the dead weight, and rebuilds the foundation. That is exactly what we do at Westfield. We do not tolerate the illusion of success. We demand absolute, measurable reality. I gripped the edges of the podium, projecting my voice to the very back of the room. "Consider our acquisition of Sentinel Tech this morning," I said. The entire room leaned in, captivated by the fresh, high-profile corporate drama. Sentinel was a company built on a house of cards. It was suffocating under the weight of severe corporate incompetence, driven by a bloated, arrogant middle management team that treated investor capital like a personal slush fund. They prioritized expensive dinners and luxury vacations over operational revenue. They embezzled from their own payroll to cover their massive personal debts. A collective murmur of disgust rippled through the crowd of investors. In the back of the room, I saw Connor physically collapse into a chair, burying his face in his hands as his crimes were broadcast to the entire financial community. "We did not negotiate with parasites," I stated coldly, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "We did not offer grace periods. We executed a hostile audit, completely eliminated the entire middle management tier, and fired the executives responsible without a single dime of severance. We cut the cancer out of the company. Because in this industry, arrogance without competence is a terminal disease, and at Westfield Capital, we are the cure." The ballroom erupted into a massive standing ovation. The applause was thunderous, echoing off the gold leaf ceilings. I smiled, offered a brief nod of acknowledgement to the crowd, and stepped away from the podium. I walked down the steps at the side of the stage, bypassing the main floor, and heading straight for the quiet, carpeted hallway that led out to the private valet loading dock. I was entirely finished with the gala. I had delivered the execution, and now I wanted to go home. But before I could reach the heavy exit doors, the sound of frantic, scrambling footsteps echoed down the hallway behind me. "Kendra, wait! Kendra, stop right now!" Calvin shouted, his voice cracking with panic. I stopped and turned around. My entire family was rushing down the hallway toward me. They looked completely deranged. Brenda was practically tripping over her beaded dress, Calvin was sweating profusely, and Amanda was trailing behind them, sobbing uncontrollably. Connor was not with them. He had likely fled the building to avoid facing the investors he had stolen from. They skidded to a halt a few feet away from me. The dynamic had violently, permanently shifted. They were no longer sneering or commanding. They were begging. "I cannot believe this." Calvin panted, his chest heaving. "You are the CEO. You own Westfield Capital. You bought Connor's company. Why did you not tell us? Why did you let us think you were broke?" "Because you preferred me that way," I replied smoothly, crossing my arms over my chest. "You needed me to be a failure so you could pretend Amanda was a success." Brenda stepped forward, her hands shaking as she reached out desperately, trying to grab my arm. I stepped back, refusing to let her touch me. "Kendra, listen to me," Brenda pleaded, her voice shrill and panicked. "We are your parents. We are family. You have to fix this right now. Connor is completely ruined. He has no job and millions in debt. The bank is going to take their house. You have to give Amanda the senior vice president job. She is your sister. You have the power to hire her right now and save her family from bankruptcy. We can put all of this behind us. Just give her the salary." I looked at my mother in sheer disbelief. The absolute staggering audacity of her demand was almost impressive. Even after watching me publicly dismantle a corrupt tech firm, she still believed she could order me to hand over a six-figure executive role to a woman who had spent her entire life tearing me down. "She deserves that job," Calvin insisted, stepping closer and trying to use his physical size to intimidate me, a tactic that no longer worked. "Amanda has the corporate background. She has the Vanguard restructuring on her resume. She can help you run your company, Kendra. You owe this to us. We raised you. You have to save your sister." I looked at Amanda. She was weeping quietly, refusing to make eye contact with me. She was still terrified of our parents finding out that her entire corporate background was a massive fabricated lie. "Amanda," I said softly, cutting through my parents' frantic demands. "Do you want to tell them the truth, or should I?" Amanda let out a loud, hysterical sob and shook her head violently. "Please, Kendra, no," she begged, her voice entirely broken. "Please do not do this." "You do not get to ask me for mercy," I replied coldly. I unclasped my designer evening bag and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the screen, opening the secure audio file Malik had sent me immediately following Amanda's disastrous interview. I synced my phone to the hallway's ambient speaker system, a feature I had specifically requested the hotel staff grant me access to earlier that afternoon. I turned the volume all the way up and pressed play. The crystal-clear audio of Amanda, sitting in my glass conference room, filled the quiet hallway. Malik's voice echoed first, asking her a question about her motivation for seeking the massive salary at Westfield Capital. Then Amanda's voice responded. It was not the weeping, broken voice of the woman standing in front of me now. It was the arrogant, condescending tone she had used her entire life. Honestly, the audio recording of Amanda practically laughed, "I need the financial security because my family is a complete disaster with money. My parents are practically bankrupt. They drain their retirement accounts just to buy cheap country club memberships to pretend they are wealthy. I have had to carry the burden of the family image entirely on my own shoulders. My father is delusional, and my mother is completely obsessed with status she cannot afford. If I do not secure this high-level income, they will probably lose their house, and I cannot have that kind of embarrassment attached to my brand." Brenda gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. Calvin's face went completely slack, the color draining from his cheeks as he listened to his golden child casually dissect and mock their financial struggles to a complete stranger in a corporate boardroom. The recording continued seamlessly, transitioning to Malik pressing her about the Vanguard acquisition. Public corporate records show that the Vanguard restructuring did not utilize an external legal department. Malik's recorded voice stated smoothly, "Are you saying your resume misrepresents your specific role in that campaign?" I watched my parents turn their heads slowly to look at Amanda. They had bragged about the Vanguard deal to everyone they knew. It was the cornerstone of her entire fake identity. "No, of course not." The recorded Amanda stammered, her voice suddenly high-pitched and panicked. The strategy was collaborative. It was a team effort. "That is remarkable." Malik's voice cut back and cold and lethal. Especially considering Vanguard's manufacturing subsidiary was entirely non-union. There were no town halls. "You have completely fabricated this entire employment history. You stole credit for the grueling work of others." I tapped the screen and stopped the recording. The silence in the hallway was heavier than lead. Brenda stared at Amanda, her eyes wide with a horrific realization. "You lied to us," Brenda whispered, her voice trembling with absolute devastation. "The Vanguard deal, the promotions, the money. You made all of it up." Calvin looked like he was going to be physically sick. "You told the Westfield executives that we were broke," Calvin said, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper. "You sat in a boardroom and called us a disaster." Amanda could not speak. She simply stood there, sobbing into her hands, completely stripped of her golden child armor. The truth was out in the open, raw and undeniable. "She did not just steal credit for the grueling work of others," I said, looking directly at my parents' shattered faces. "She stole the credit for my work. I designed the Vanguard restructuring. I executed that acquisition. Your perfect daughter printed out an article about my success, slapped her name on it, and walked into my building demanding a job." I slipped my phone back into my evening bag and snapped it shut. "You wanted to know why I let you think I was broke," I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy whisper. "Because it cost me absolutely nothing to let you look like fools, and it cost you everything to pretend you were better than me." I turned my back on them. I did not wait for an apology, and I did not stay to watch the fallout. I walked through the heavy exit doors and stepped out into the cool, refreshing night air. My private town car was waiting at the curb. I had entirely severed the rotting branch of my family tree, and tomorrow morning I was going to collect on the rest of their debts. The Sunday morning following the gala arrived with a heavy, oppressive silence. The storm from the previous night had passed, leaving the city streets slick and gray. I did not sleep, and I did not need to. I drank a single cup of black coffee, called my private driver, and headed straight to Brooklyn. I had one final piece of business to conduct. When my town car pulled up to my parents' historic brownstone, I could see the sheer panic radiating from the property before I even stepped out of the vehicle. Through the large front windows, I saw shadows pacing frantically back and forth. 4 massive designer suitcases were piled haphazardly on the front porch. Connor and Amanda had clearly fled their heavily mortgaged suburban townhouse in the middle of the night, terrified that federal auditors or bank officials would be knocking on their door by dawn. They had come running back to the only safety net they thought they had left. I did not knock. I simply turned the brass handle and walked into the grand foyer. The entire family was gathered in the massive open-concept kitchen. The dynamic of the room had been entirely obliterated. The arrogant, untouchable family unit that had mocked me just a week ago at the Labor Day cookout was gone. Connor was sitting at the marble kitchen island with his head buried in his hands, his rented tuxedo still on completely ruined and smelling of stale bourbon. Amanda was huddled in the corner wearing a pair of old sweatpants, her face red and swollen from hours of hysterical crying. My parents were standing near the stove drinking coffee and looking like they had aged 10 years overnight. When they heard my footsteps on the hardwood floor, all four of them snapped their heads in my direction. Nobody screamed. Nobody hurled an insult. The absolute reality of my power had finally terrified them into submission. But narcissists do not know how to apologize. When they are backed into a corner, they simply rewrite history. My mother was the first to speak. She set her coffee mug down and took a cautious step toward me, forcing a stiff, completely unnatural smile onto her face. Kendra, Brenda said, her voice shaking slightly. "We are so glad you came over. We have been up all night talking. We have been doing a lot of reflecting on everything that happened yesterday." I stood at the edge of the kitchen, my hands tucked into the pockets of my tailored wool coat. I did not say a word. I just waited for the inevitable manipulation. "Your father and I realized that our methods over the years might have seemed harsh," Brenda continued, her eyes darting nervously toward Calvin for support. "But you have to understand, Kendra. We knew you had this incredible potential inside of you. We saw your brilliance even when you dropped out of law school. We knew that the corporate world was going to be brutal, especially for a woman like you. We treated you the way we did to make you tough. We had to be hard on you, so you would build the thick skin required to conquer the financial district." I stared at her, completely fascinated by the sheer, unadulterated delusion. "Exactly," Calvin chimed in, puffing his chest out just a fraction, trying to reclaim some of his lost authority as the patriarch. "It was tough love, Kendra. Everything we did, every time we pushed you aside or challenged you, it was to fuel your ambition. We were the fire that forged your empire. You would never have built Westfield Capital if we had coddled you the way we coddled your sister. We sacrificed our relationship with you so that you could become a billionaire." Amanda let out a loud, pathetic sob from the corner, but my parents completely ignored her. Their golden child was officially useless to them now. She had no money, no status, and no leverage. They were entirely focused on the daughter they had abused, desperately trying to claim ownership of my success. "So you see," Calvin said, taking a step closer to me, "you owe your incredible success to this family. We protected you from weakness, and now family needs to protect family. You proved your point last night. You showed everyone how powerful you are. Now it is time to do the right thing. We need you to call your auditors off Connor, pay his corporate debts, reinstate his company. We are asking you to step up and be the loyal daughter we raised you to be." I let his words hang in the quiet kitchen. I looked at Connor, who slowly lifted his head, his bloodshot eyes staring at me with a pathetic glimmer of hope. He actually believed that my parents' ridiculous gaslighting was going to work. He actually thought I was going to write a multi-million-dollar check to bail out the man who had ordered security to throw me onto the street. I did not yell. I did not argue with their completely fabricated version of my childhood. I simply unbuttoned my coat, reached inside, and pulled out a thick, heavy legal folder. I walked over to the marble kitchen island and dropped the folder right in front of Connor. It landed with a loud, heavy slap. "I am not here to negotiate," I said, my voice cold, flat, and completely devoid of emotion. "And I am certainly not here to thank you for a lifetime of emotional abuse. I am here to finalize my investments." Calvin frowned, looking down at the legal folder. "What is this?" he demanded. 3 years ago," I said, looking directly into my father's eyes, "you and Mom secretly filed for bankruptcy. You had drained your entire retirement portfolio, completely exhausted your savings, and maxed out multiple lines of credit. You did all of this to fund Amanda's lavish destination wedding, to buy Connor his luxury vehicles, and to maintain the absolute lie that you were part of the city's elite." Brenda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Amanda stopped crying and looked up, her eyes wide with shock. They had absolutely no idea. My parents had hidden their financial ruin from their precious golden child to keep the illusion alive. The bank was preparing to foreclose on this historic brownstone. I continued, my voice echoing clearly in the stunned silence. You were exactly 30 days away from being dragged out of this property by the authorities. But at the very last minute, a private holding company stepped in and bought your distressed mortgage from the bank. They absorbed your debt, allowing you to stay in the home under a highly restricted silent lease agreement. Calvin's face turned completely gray. He reached out with a trembling hand and flipped open the heavy cover of the legal folder. The first page was a copy of the property deed. You never looked into the holding company that bought your debt, I said softly. You were too arrogant and too relieved that you did not have to confess your failures to your country club friends. If you had looked, you would have realized that the holding company is a direct subsidiary of Westfield Capital. Calvin staggered backward, hitting the stainless steel refrigerator. Brenda let out a horrific, choked cry. I own this brownstone. I stated the absolute truth, finally dropping like an anvil in the center of the room. I hold the deed. I own the roof over your heads. I own the marble floor you are standing on, and I own every single door in this building. I have owned it for 3 years. The silence that followed was absolute. The final pillar of their fake, arrogant empire had just been kicked out from under them. They did not own a multi-million-dollar historic property. They owned nothing. They were tenants living entirely by my secret grace, while they spent every family holiday tearing me down. Connor stared at the deed, his mouth hanging open. He looked from the paper to me, realizing that the sister-in-law he had treated like a servant practically owned the entire family. I am not a monster, I said, my voice completely steady. I am not going to evict my own parents. Brenda let out a massive sigh of relief, fresh tears streaming down her face. Oh, Kendra, thank you, she wept, stepping forward. I knew you had a good heart. I knew you would not put us on the street. Do not interrupt me, I snapped, my voice cracking like a whip. Brenda instantly froze. I am not evicting you, I repeated. But the Bank of Kendra is permanently closed. The silent lease agreement is officially terminated. Mom. Dad, your rent is due on the 1st of every month, and it will be set at the exact current market rate for a historic Brooklyn brownstone. If you miss a single payment, my legal team will file the eviction papers the very next morning. You will have to get real jobs. You will have to sell your designer clothes. You will have to actually work for a living, just like you always told me to do. Calvin looked like he was going to faint. The prospect of having to abandon his country club lifestyle and work a minimum wage job in his 60s was a fate worse than death to him. And as for you two, I said, turning my gaze to Amanda and Connor. Amanda flinched, shrinking back against the wall. Connor did not even try to look me in the eye. I know the bank locked you out of your townhouse last night, I said. I know you brought your suitcases here thinking you could leech off my parents while you hide from your creditors. But as I just established, this is my property, and I do not allow corporate thieves and fabricated executives to reside in my buildings. Amanda let out a loud, hysterical wail. Kendra, please, she begged, dropping to her knees on the hardwood floor. We have absolutely nowhere to go. We have no money. Connor's accounts are frozen. We cannot afford a hotel. You cannot do this to me. I am your sister. You stopped being my sister the day you decided my existence was an embarrassment to your brand, I replied coldly. You have exactly 24 hours to get your bags out of my house. If you are still on this property tomorrow morning, David and his security team will physically remove you, and I will have you arrested for trespassing. I turned my back on them. I did not wait for my parents to plead. I did not wait for Connor to start cursing or Amanda to keep sobbing. I simply walked out of the kitchen, down the grand hallway, and out the heavy mahogany front door. The cool morning air hit my face, crisp and refreshing. I walked down the stone steps and approached my waiting town car. The driver opened the back door for me. Inside, Malik was sitting in the plush leather seat, holding a digital tablet, quietly reviewing the financial projections for our next quarter. He looked up as I slid into the car and closed the door. It is done, Malik asked softly. It is done, I replied. The driver pulled away from the curb. I looked out the tinted window, staring back at the beautiful historic brownstone one last time. For my entire life, that house had been a prison of impossible expectations, emotional cruelty, and conditional love. But as the car turned the corner and the house disappeared from view, I felt absolutely nothing but total blinding freedom. The empire was entirely mine, the dead weight was finally cut, and the future belonged to me. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family that demanded everything, but gave absolutely nothing in return? Have you ever had to cut the anchor to save yourself from drowning? I would love to hear your stories of survival and success in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about claiming your worth and building your own empire. Share this video with someone who might need the courage to stand up to the people who underestimate them. Thank you for listening. And remember, the family you choose to build is always stronger than the one that tries to break you.